In the grand assembly rooms of London's most prestigious district, where chandeliers cast their golden light upon a sea of silks and satins, Lady Margaret Elmsworth stood as still as the forgotten portrait that hung in her family's lesser drawing-room. At 32 years, she had long accustomed herself to invisibility, a talent honed through 17 seasons of diminishing expectations. The musicians played a lively quadrille as she observed from her customary position near the potted palms, her gloved hands folded neatly before her, her grey-blue eyes reflecting the light but never quite catching it. "Behold, gentlemen," came a voice, sharp with wine and sharper with cruelty, the forgotten ornament of the Elmsworth collection. Sir Alaric Vane, resplendent in a waistcoat of peacock blue that matched his mocking eyes, bowed with exaggerated deference toward Lady Margaret. "Shall we place bets on which shall gather more dust by season's end, the family heirlooms or the family spinster?" Laughter rippled through the gathering, discreet behind fans, bold and braying from the gentlemen. Lady Margaret felt the familiar heat of humiliation climb her neck and settle in her cheeks, yet her expression remained composed, a mask of dignity worn smooth through frequent use. "You mistake yourself, Sir Alaric," she replied, her voice soft yet clear as a chapel bell. "Dust gathers only upon that which remains untouched by purpose. I find myself quite thoroughly occupied with matters beyond your comprehension." Sir Alaric's smile tightened. "Ah, yes, the occupation of perpetual anticipation. Tell me, Lady Margaret, what appointment do you await with such dedication? Perhaps an invitation to grace the ballrooms of 1795 once more." Fresh laughter erupted, and Lady Margaret's fingers instinctively sought the blue ribbon at her wrist, a talisman against cruelty, a relic from a time when she still believed her presence might matter. "The appointment," came a deep voice from beyond the circle of mockery, "is presently with me." The crowd parted as if by royal decree, revealing a figure whose mere presence seemed to dim the chandeliers above. The Duke of Thornvale stood tall and imposing in his immaculate black evening attire, his face a study in aristocratic reserve. His grey-green eyes, however, held something that made even Sir Alaric's smile falter, a cold, measured contempt. "Lady Margaret has graciously agreed to enlighten me on the subject of Wordsworth's latest publication," the Duke continued, his gaze never leaving Sir Alaric's increasingly uncomfortable countenance. "A discussion I fear would prove tediously elevated for present company." He extended his arm toward Lady Margaret with such natural authority that she found herself placing her gloved hand upon it before conscious thought intervened. "Your Grace," she murmured, inclining her head slightly, concealing her bewilderment beneath a lifetime of practiced composure. As the Duke led her away, Sir Alaric called after them with forced joviality, "Mind she doesn't expire from excitement, Thornvale. Ancient artifacts must be handled with extraordinary care." The Duke did not deign to acknowledge the barb. Instead, he guided Lady Margaret toward the terrace doors, where the evening air promised respite from the stifling atmosphere of calculated cruelties. "Forgive the presumption of my intervention, Lady Margaret," he said, once they had gained the relative privacy of the marble balcony. "I have observed Sir Alaric's particular brand of entertainment for some time and found it increasingly intolerable." Lady Margaret studied the gardens below, where moonlight transformed ordinary hedgerows into labyrinthine mysteries. "Your concern is most gallant, Your Grace, but unnecessary. One cannot be wounded by that which one has come to expect. Expectation of injury does not diminish its effect," he replied, his voice softening almost imperceptibly. "Merely its visibility to those who inflict it." She turned to regard him then, this man whose reputation for reserve bordered on legendary. The Duke of Thornvale, widowed these 5 years past, whose attendance at any social function was considered an event worthy of newspaper commentary. What business had he with a woman whom society had collectively agreed to overlook? "Why then," she asked, her tone careful but direct, "would you risk association with society's favorite object of ridicule? Your Grace's reputation hardly requires such charitable exercises." Something flickered across his stern features, not offense, but perhaps a glimmer of respect. "I have found, Lady Margaret, that reputation is but a shadow cast by perception, not substance, and I have long since ceased to govern my actions based on the length or direction of such shadows." As he spoke, Lady Margaret noticed a small scar that traced the line of his jaw, a memento from his military days, perhaps, before inheritance had called him to ducal responsibilities. It humanized his otherwise perfect countenance, suggesting depths beneath the immaculate surface. The orchestra within began a new melody, the notes drifting through the open doors like petals on an evening breeze. The Duke's expression changed, subtle as twilight's progression. "If I may be so bold," he said, adjusting his pristine white gloves with deliberate care, "would you honor me with this dance?" Lady Margaret felt something long dormant stir within her breast. Not hope, for she had relinquished that frivolity years ago, but perhaps its distant cousin, curiosity. "The gossips will find fresh fodder in such a pairing, Your Grace," she warned, though her pulse had quickened beneath her modest gown of lavender silk. "Let them feast," he replied with unexpected fervor. "I find myself suddenly famished for more substantial nourishment than society's thin gruel of judgment and spectacle." He extended his hand, and in that moment, Lady Margaret glimpsed something in his eyes that mirrored her own carefully concealed loneliness. With a deliberateness that belied her inner trembling, she placed her gloved hand in his. As they returned to the ballroom, a hush fell over the assembly like evening mist over Hampstead Heath. The Duke of Thornvale, the most eligible widower in 3 counties, was leading the forgotten Elmsworth spinster to the centre of the floor. And in that moment of stunned silence before the first note of the waltz began, Lady Margaret felt for the first time in 17 seasons the weight of every eye upon her, not in mockery, but in disbelief. The music commenced, and with it, something else entirely. The ballroom had fallen into a silence so complete that Lady Margaret could hear the rustle of her own gown as the Duke of Thornvale guided her to the centre of the floor. She was acutely aware of every detail, the warmth of his gloved hand at her waist, the scent of cedar and leather that surrounded him, the perfect distance he maintained, proper yet somehow intimate. Most of all, she felt the collective gaze of London's elite, their expressions transforming from amusement to astonishment as the orchestra recovered its composure and began the first strains of a waltz. "Your form is impeccable, Lady Margaret," the Duke observed as they moved with flawless precision through the opening turns. "I suspect you have been gravely underestimated in many respects." "A lifetime of observation affords one certain advantages, Your Grace," she replied, her voice steadier than her heart. "When one rarely participates, one develops an eye for detail that participants themselves often miss." A subtle appreciation warmed his austere features. "Then pray, what details have you observed about me this evening that others might have overlooked?" The boldness of his question might have flustered her had she not spent years schooling her every reaction. Instead, Lady Margaret allowed herself a moment's consideration before answering. "I observe that Your Grace adjusts your gloves before every decision of consequence," she said, "that you carry a timepiece that appears military rather than ornamental, that despite your reputation for solitude, you possess remarkable patience for social tedium, and that the scar upon your jaw troubles you still, though the wound itself has long since healed." The Duke's step faltered almost imperceptibly, a disruption so slight that only his partner would have detected it. "You see a great deal, Lady Margaret," he said, his voice lowered for her ears alone, "more perhaps than is comfortable for either of us." "Forgive me if I have spoken out of turn," she replied, a blush threatening to betray her composure. "Observation is a habit formed in silence. I sometimes forget its articulation may prove unwelcome." His hand tightened slightly at her waist, not in censure but in reassurance. "On the contrary, I find honesty as refreshing as it is rare in these gilded chambers, but I wonder, what benefit has such acute perception brought its possessor?" Lady Margaret's gaze drifted momentarily to where Sir Alaric stood scowling at the edge of the dance floor, his customary entourage now diminished as attention focused on the unexpected spectacle at the centre of the room. "The benefit of anticipation, Your Grace," she answered. "When one can read the weather in a gathering cloud, one is seldom caught without shelter in the downpour." The Duke followed her gaze, his expression hardening as he observed Sir Alaric's evident displeasure. "Some storms, Lady Margaret, deserve to be weathered by more than one soul, particularly when they are manufactured by those who have never felt true tempests." As they completed another perfect turn, Lady Margaret became aware of a new sensation, whispers spreading through the assembly, no longer mocking but urgent with speculation. The novelty of their pairing had transformed from momentary curiosity to significant event, worthy of serious consideration. She could almost feel the social equations being recalculated throughout the ballroom. "I must inquire, Your Grace," she said, her voice carefully modulated, "what prompted this most unexpected rescue? We have been acquainted these many years, yet never exchanged more than formal greetings." For a moment, the Duke's mask of aristocratic reserve seemed to soften, revealing something that might, in another man, have been vulnerability. "Perhaps I grew weary of observing injustice without intervention," he replied. "Or perhaps I simply wished to dance with the one person in the room whose conversation might prove stimulating, beyond the tedious catalogue of weather and weddings." Before Lady Margaret could respond, a flurry of movement at the ballroom entrance diverted the attention of the assembly. Lady Isolde Fairfax had arrived, resplendent in burgundy silk that complemented her golden hair and commanded admiration. Her calculating green eyes surveyed the room with practiced nonchalance until they settled upon the Duke and his unexpected partner. For the briefest moment, her perfect composure faltered, revealing a flash of something cold and sharp as January frost. "It appears we have drawn the attention of the formidable Lady Fairfax," Lady Margaret observed, noting the subtle tension that had entered the Duke's bearing. "Lady Fairfax," he replied with careful neutrality, "has cultivated attention as others cultivate roses, with meticulous dedication to appearance and strategic removal of competing blooms." The waltz approached its conclusion, and Lady Margaret felt a curious reluctance to see it end. This unexpected interlude, this moment of being truly seen rather than merely glanced past, had awakened something she had long considered dormant. "I fear I have imposed upon your generosity long enough, Your Grace," she said as the final notes approached. "Your noble intervention has served its purpose. Sir Alaric appears thoroughly chastened, and I have been granted a reprieve from his particular brand of entertainment." The Duke regarded her with an intensity that belied his outward composure. "You mistake my intentions entirely, Lady Margaret, if you believe this dance a mere stratagem of social intervention." "What then would you have me believe it to be?" she asked, her voice barely audible above the concluding strains of music. He guided her through the final turn with elegant precision before answering. "The beginning of a conversation too long delayed, perhaps, or if you will permit a man of practical mind a moment of fanciful thinking, the opening movement of a more elaborate composition." As the music ended, the Duke bowed with flawless decorum, yet maintained her hand in his a moment longer than strict propriety dictated. "I shall call upon you tomorrow," he said, his tone making the statement a certainty rather than a request. "There is a matter of some significance I wish to discuss, if you would grant me that honor." Lady Margaret felt the weight of every gaze in the room upon them, particularly the glacial stare of Lady Isolde, who had now positioned herself strategically near Sir Alaric, their heads inclined in private conversation. "I shall be at home to visitors between the hours of 2 and 4, she replied with careful formality, though her pulse quickened at the prospect. As the Duke escorted her from the dance floor, Lady Margaret caught sight of her reflection in one of the ballroom's gilded mirrors. The woman who gazed back seemed somehow altered, not in feature or attire, but in the ineffable quality of presence. For perhaps the first time in 17 seasons, Lady Margaret Elmsworth appeared not as an afterthought to the evening's arrangements, but as an essential element of its composition. Later, as her carriage bore her home through London's misty streets, she removed one glove and touched the blue ribbon at her wrist, the token she had carried since her first season, when hope still bloomed fresh as April violets. What strange turn of fortune had transpired that a gesture meant as charity might kindle something so dangerously akin to expectation? In the privacy of her modest chamber, Lady Margaret opened the rosewood desk, where she kept her most private correspondence, letters written to herself, chronicling the slow dissolution of dreams into dignified resignation. Tonight she would add a new entry, though her rational mind warned against investing too much significance in what was likely nothing more than a gentleman's momentary compassion. Yet, as she dipped her pen in ink, she found herself recalling not the public triumph of their dance, but the fleeting instant when the Duke's perfect composure had revealed something genuine beneath, a glimpse of shared understanding that felt, in its way, more intimate than any waltz. The clock struck midnight as she sealed her thoughts away with a drop of violet wax. Tomorrow would come, with all its sober realities. But tonight, just for tonight, Lady Margaret Elmsworth permitted herself the luxury of uncertain possibility. The following afternoon found Lady Margaret seated in her modest drawing-room, an island of refined tranquility amid the bustling indifference of London. Her residence, a small but respectable townhouse inherited from a maternal aunt, reflected its mistress in every particular, elegant without ostentation, dignified without pretension, and possessing qualities that revealed themselves only upon thoughtful observation. The mantel clock had just struck 2 when Mrs. Pembroke was announced. The elderly widow entered with her characteristic blend of warmth and ceremony, her silver-grey hair arranged precisely beneath a cap of delicate lace. "My dear Margaret," she exclaimed, settling herself upon the sofa with a rustle of sage-green silk, "you cannot imagine the tempest of speculation your performance has generated." The entire morning assembly at Lady Whitmore's could speak of nothing else. Lady Margaret arranged her features into an expression of mild interest as she poured tea from a silver pot, one of the few genuinely valuable pieces in her possession. "I hardly think a single dance constitutes a performance, Mrs. Pembroke. A single dance with the Duke of Thornvale. Mrs. Pembroke's eyes twinkled with mischief and affection. "My dear, you might as well have performed a Highland fling upon the Prince Regent's dining table. The effect could scarcely have been more dramatic." Despite her determination to maintain perspective, Lady Margaret felt a smile tug at the corners of her mouth. "You exaggerate most dreadfully. I assure you, I understate the matter significantly, Mrs." Pembroke replied, accepting her cup with a gracious nod. Lady Jersey declared it the most unexpected pairing since the Prussian ambassador was discovered in the conservatory with the gardener's apprentice. "How flattering to be mentioned in the same breath as a diplomatic scandal," Lady Margaret observed dryly, though inwardly she marvelled at how quickly the incident had circulated. Mrs. Pembroke's expression softened. "My dearest girl, you know I speak in jest. In truth, I was filled with such pride watching you glide across that floor as if you had been born to command it. And the Duke—" She paused, her eyes growing thoughtful. There was something in his manner that suggested more than mere courtesy. Lady Margaret busied herself with the arrangement of small sandwiches upon a silver tray, avoiding her friend's perceptive gaze. "The Duke is known for his impeccable manners. I believe he merely objected to Sir Alaric's particular brand of entertainment and chose an expedient method of interrupting it." "Expedient?" Mrs. Pembroke raised a skeptical eyebrow. "There are a dozen more expedient methods available to a man of his station, none of which would involve dancing with the very person being ridiculed. No, my dear, there was purpose in his selection." Before Lady Margaret could formulate a suitable response, the butler appeared at the drawing-room threshold, his expression betraying an unusual degree of animation. "The Duke of Thornvale, my lady," he announced, his voice carrying a note of suppressed excitement that made Lady Margaret wince inwardly. The Duke entered with the quiet assurance of one accustomed to commanding space rather than occupying it. He was dressed in a coat of dark blue superfine that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders, his cravat arranged in a style both elegant and restrained. In daylight, Lady Margaret noticed details that had escaped her observation the previous evening, the slight threads of silver at his temples, the depth of experience etched around his eyes, the way his presence seemed to alter the very dimensions of her modest drawing-room. "Lady Margaret," he greeted her with a formal bow. "Mrs. Pembroke, I trust I do not intrude upon your afternoon ritual." "Not at all, Your Grace," Lady Margaret replied, rising to perform a perfect curtsy. "We were just discussing horticultural innovations." Mrs. Pembroke's delicate snort of amusement was hastily disguised as a cough. "Indeed, Your Grace, the most fascinating chow blooms have been observed recently in the most unexpected places." The Duke's mouth curved slightly. "I have always found that the most remarkable specimens often flourish where least anticipated, provided they are granted adequate recognition." He accepted the offered seat across from Lady Margaret, his posture perfect, yet somehow without affectation. The butler brought fresh tea, his hands trembling slightly in the presence of such elevated nobility. "I confess, Your Grace," Lady Margaret said once the servant had withdrawn, "that your expressed intention to call took me somewhat by surprise. I cannot imagine what matter of significance might require discussion between us." The Duke regarded her thoughtfully, his grey-green eyes assessing in a manner that made her acutely conscious of every aspect of her appearance and surroundings. "Before addressing that particular subject, I must inquire, has Sir Alaric made any further attempts at what he doubtless considers wit at your expense?" Mrs. Pembroke interjected with undisguised satisfaction. "Sir Alaric departed for his country estate this morning with remarkable haste, Your Grace. It seems a pressing agricultural matter required his immediate attention." "How fortuitous for his tenants," the Duke replied, his tone suggesting he found the timing anything but coincidental. "Though I suspect the quality of local society will suffer immeasurably in his absence." Lady Margaret set down her teacup with deliberate care. "While I appreciate your concern, Your Grace, I assure you I have weathered far more significant storms than Sir Alaric's theatrical mockery. One develops certain immunities after 17 seasons." Something flickered in the Duke's expression, a shadow of what might have been admiration mingled with regret. "Immunity suggests absence of effect, Lady Margaret. I rather suspect you have developed something far more valuable, the capacity to endure with dignity that which lesser spirits would find unbearable." His words, delivered without a trace of condescension, created a momentary silence during which Lady Margaret found herself unable to summon her usual shield of composed indifference. Mrs. Pembroke, with the privilege of age and intimate friendship, regarded the Duke with undisguised curiosity. "You mentioned a matter of significance, Your Grace. I find myself positively aflame with speculation." The Duke set his untouched teacup upon its saucer with deliberate precision. "The matter concerns an upcoming exhibition at the Royal Academy. I find myself in need of a companion whose aesthetic judgment I can trust implicitly." Lady Margaret blinked in surprise. "Surely your Grace has access to numerous acquaintances with far more informed opinions on artistic matters than I could possibly offer." "Numerous acquaintances, yes," he agreed, "yet vanishingly few whose observations are untainted by the desire to please or impress, fewer still who possess the courage to express genuine discernment rather than fashionable opinion." Mrs. Pembroke's eyes brightened with barely suppressed delight. "Lady Margaret has the most remarkable eye for authenticity, your Grace. Her grandfather was an avid collector, you know, and imparted to her a most unfashionable preference for substance over mere spectacle." Lady Margaret shot her friend a quelling glance that went entirely unheeded. "The exhibition opens tomorrow," the Duke continued. "With your permission, I shall call for you at 11. The early hour should afford us the opportunity to view the works without excessive crowds." It was not quite a question, yet neither was it a command. Lady Margaret found herself in the unfamiliar position of being genuinely consulted rather than merely informed. "I should be honored, your Grace," she replied after a moment's consideration, "though I feel compelled to warn you that my opinions on modern portraiture may prove disappointingly conventional." The Duke rose from his seat with fluid grace. "I assure you, Lady Margaret, disappointment is the least of what I anticipate from our association." As he prepared to take his leave, a sudden commotion at the front door penetrated the drawing-room's tranquility. Moments later, Lady Margaret's youngest niece, Clara Pembroke, daughter of her dear friend's late son, burst into the room with the impulsive energy of youth, her bonnet askew and her cheeks flushed with excitement. "Aunt Margaret, you cannot imagine what I have just—" She halted abruptly, her eyes widening as she registered the Duke's presence. "Your Grace, I beg your pardon for this unforgivable intrusion." The Duke inclined his head with unexpected warmth. "No pardon is required, Lady Clara. Youth brings with it certain privileges, not least the capacity for genuine enthusiasm, unconstrained by tedious convention." Clara performed a hasty curtsy, her expression a charming mixture of mortification and curiosity. "You are most generous, your Grace. I had not expected— that is to say, I came directly from Lady Fairfax's morning salon, where—" Lady Margaret interceded gently. "Perhaps your news might wait until His Grace has concluded his visit, my dear." The Duke, however, seemed suddenly intent. "Lady Fairfax's salon. I confess some interest in the proceedings of that particular gathering, as I declined her invitation in favor of other commitments." Clara hesitated, glancing between the Duke and her aunt. "It was nothing of consequence, your Grace, merely the usual exchange of compliments and observations on recent social events." "Including, one presumes, last evening's unexpected partnering?" the Duke inquired, his tone light yet underlaid with something firmer. Clara's expressive face betrayed her before diplomacy could intervene. "Lady Fairfax did make certain comments regarding the dance, yes. Though I assure you, Aunt Margaret, I defended your honor most vigorously." Lady Margaret closed her eyes briefly. "Clara, dearest, one cannot defend what has not been attacked. I am certain Lady Fairfax intended no slight." "On the contrary," Clara insisted with youthful indignation, "she most certainly suggested that your Grace's attention was motivated by pity, and that—" She broke off, suddenly aware of the impropriety of her disclosure. The Duke's expression had grown very still. "I see Lady Fairfax continues her tradition of insightful social commentary," he observed, his voice carrying a chill that made even Mrs. Pembroke straighten in her seat. "Perhaps you would be so kind as to convey a message when next you attend her salon." Clara nodded wide-eyed. "Of course, your Grace. Inform her that the Duke of Thornvale selects his companions based on qualities she might find difficult to comprehend: authentic character, intellectual substance, and dignity under duress." He turned to Lady Margaret, his severe expression softening. "Until tomorrow, Lady Margaret. 11 o'clock precisely." After the Duke had departed, leaving a charged silence in his wake, Mrs. Pembroke was the first to recover her composure. "Well," she declared, helping herself to another cup of tea with hands that trembled slightly, "I believe we have witnessed something quite extraordinary, my dears." Clara sank onto the sofa, her expression dazed. "Aunt Margaret, do you realize what this means? The Duke of Thornvale has practically declared himself your champion before the most influential gossip in London." Lady Margaret smoothed her skirts with practiced calm, though her mind raced with implications she dared not fully consider. "It means, my dear Clara, that I shall require my grey silk gown pressed for tomorrow's outing, nothing more." Yet as she poured fresh tea, Lady Margaret caught sight of her reflection in the silver service, and for the second time in as many days, she hardly recognized the woman who gazed back at her. Something had changed in her countenance, some subtle alchemy that transformed resignation into possibility. The blue ribbon at her wrist, seemed suddenly brighter against her skin, a private talisman whose significance had unexpectedly shifted from remembrance of dreams abandoned to herald of dreams deferred. The Royal Academy's exhibition halls gleamed with morning light as Lady Margaret arrived precisely at the appointed hour. The Duke's carriage, an elegant conveyance bearing his family crest, had drawn considerable attention as it collected her from her modest townhouse, and she had felt the weight of neighbours' gazes behind lace curtains. Now, as the Duke himself guided her through the marble entrance, with a solicitous hand beneath her elbow, she experienced the novel sensation of being observed with something other than dismissal or derision. "You seem preoccupied, Lady Margaret," the Duke observed as they paused before a dramatic seascape. "Does the exhibition fail to engage your interest?" She gathered her composure, smoothing the grey silk gown that represented her finest daytime attire. "Forgive me, Your Grace. I find myself unaccustomed to such public scrutiny." His gaze sharpened with perception. "You have always been watched, Lady Margaret. The difference lies merely in the quality of the observation." "Indeed," she replied, her voice carefully modulated, "and in its undisguised nature, there is something almost refreshing about open curiosity compared to surreptitious judgment." They moved through the gallery with unhurried appreciation, pausing before works that captured their mutual attention. Lady Margaret found herself gradually relaxing into genuine discourse about composition and technique, surprised by the Duke's knowledge of artistic movements, and more surprised still by his interest in her opinions. "You possess an unusual perspective," he commented, after she had offered a particularly insightful observation about a pastoral scene. "Most viewers see only the finished canvas. You appear to discern the artist's intention beneath the execution." Lady Margaret allowed herself a small smile. "Perhaps because I have spent a lifetime observing the distinction between public performance and private truth, Your Grace." A subtle change crossed his austere features, a softening almost imperceptible to anyone unaccustomed to studying nuance. "Thornvale," he said quietly, "when we are engaged in honest conversation rather than social pageantry, I would prefer you address me as Thornvale." The intimacy of this request, modest by most standards yet profound in context, momentarily silenced her. Before she could formulate a response, however, their private exchange was interrupted by an all-too-familiar voice. "Your Grace, what an unexpected delight to encounter you among the devotees of culture." Lady Isolde Fairfax approached with practiced grace, her emerald silk gown rustling like serpents through grass. She was accompanied by two younger women, whose eager expressions suggested they were debutantes under her patronage. Her gaze acknowledged Lady Margaret with perfect politeness and perfect dismissal in the same glance. "Lady Fairfax," the Duke replied with a formal bow that somehow conveyed distance rather than deference, "I find artistic appreciation a necessary counterbalance to society's more ephemeral diversions." Lady Isolde's smile remained fixed as she turned toward Lady Margaret. "And Lady Margaret Elmsworth, how charming to see you in such distinguished company. I confess your sudden emergence into society's notice has provided the most intriguing subject for speculation." Lady Margaret inclined her head with careful dignity. "I was unaware that appreciation for fine art constituted an emergence, Lady Fairfax. I have attended these exhibitions regularly these past 12 years. "Indeed?" Lady Isolde's perfectly arched eyebrow suggested skepticism. "How remarkable that one could attend with such consistency, yet leave so faint an impression. Though perhaps," she added with a glance toward the Duke, "certain companions naturally draw attention while others absorb it." The Duke's expression had grown dangerously still. "I find, Lady Fairfax, that genuine worth often reveals itself precisely when one ceases to seek validation through observation. Lady Margaret's insights on Constable's use of light have transformed my understanding of his work." Lady Isolde's smile tightened fractionally. "How perfectly enlightened of you, Your Grace, though one must be careful not to mistake novelty for substance. The pleasure of new perspectives can sometimes blind us to their limitations." She turned to Lady Margaret with a solicitous expression that poorly disguised its venom. "My dear, I must commend your courage. So many women in your position would shrink from public scrutiny after years of comfortable obscurity. The transition from wallflower to curiosity can prove challenging for even the strongest constitution." Lady Margaret felt the familiar heat of humiliation threatening to rise, but years of endurance had forged her composure into steel. "How fortunate then, Lady Fairfax, that my constitution has been strengthened by years of observing the varieties of human kindness and its absence." A tense silence followed, during which the Duke shifted almost imperceptibly closer to Lady Margaret's side. "If you will excuse us," he said with glacial courtesy, Lady Margaret and I have yet to view the Eastern Gallery. I understand Turner has contributed several new works that promise to provoke substantial debate. As they moved away, Lady Margaret maintained her dignity with every careful step, though she could feel Lady Isolde's gaze burning between her shoulder blades like a brand. "I apologize for that encounter," the Duke said quietly once they had gained sufficient distance. "Lady Fairfax possesses a particular talent for administering poison with a smile." "You need not apologize for another's behavior," Lady Margaret replied, "nor may I add for your own. Your defense was gallant but unnecessary. I have weathered far worse storms than Lady Fairfax's barely disguised contempt." He regarded her thoughtfully. "It is not a question of necessity, but of justice. The woman deliberately sought to diminish you for no purpose beyond her own amusement and ambition. She sees me as a threat," Lady Margaret observed with sudden clarity. "How extraordinary!" The Duke's mouth curved slightly. "Not extraordinary at all, but entirely predictable. You have emerged as an unknown quantity in a game she believed she controlled completely." They paused before a Turner seascape, its tumultuous waves and threatening skies reflecting Lady Margaret's inner turbulence. For several moments they observed in companionable silence. "May I pose a question, Your Grace? Thornvale," she ventured finally, the private address still unfamiliar on her tongue. "By all means. Why have you chosen to single me out for such marked attention? I am neither young nor beautiful nor wealthy. I possess no influential connections. My family, while respectable, holds no particular sway in society. What possible advantage could my companionship offer a man in your position?" The directness of her inquiry might have offended a lesser man, but the Duke merely considered her with that same thoughtful intensity that seemed to penetrate all social pretense. "Must there be advantage?" he asked. "Can there not simply be preference?" Before she could respond, a commotion near the gallery entrance drew their attention. A messenger in Elmsworth livery was scanning the crowd with evident urgency. Upon spotting Lady Margaret, he approached with hasty deference. "My lady, forgive the intrusion. A matter of pressing family business requires your immediate return." Lady Margaret felt a chill of apprehension. "What has occurred?" The messenger lowered his voice. "A letter has arrived from your brother's solicitor, my lady. Mrs. Pembroke thought it best you return without delay." The Duke intervened with quiet authority. "My carriage is at your disposal, Lady Margaret. Allow me to escort you home immediately." The journey passed in tense silence, Lady Margaret's mind racing with possibilities, none of them promising. Her relationship with her brother, the current Lord Elmsworth, had been coolly distant since their parents' passing, his resentment of her modest inheritance, a persistent undercurrent in their limited interactions. When they arrived at her residence, Mrs. Pembroke awaited them in the drawing-room, her usually cheerful countenance grave with concern. "My dear," she said, rising to embrace Lady Margaret, "I fear the news is most troubling. Your brother's solicitor has forwarded this communication." She handed Lady Margaret a heavy envelope bearing the Elmsworth seal. With steady fingers belying her inner trepidation, Lady Margaret broke the seal and unfolded the document. As she read, the colour drained from her face. "It appears," she said finally, her voice remarkably controlled, "that my brother contests the legality of my aunt's bequest. He claims this house and its contents rightfully belong to the entailed estate. His solicitor demands an inventory of all items and suggests I make arrangements for alternative accommodation within the month." Mrs. Pembroke gasped in outrage. "This is unconscionable. Your aunt's will was perfectly clear. The property was hers to bestow as she wished." The Duke, who had remained a silent presence throughout the exchange, now spoke with quiet certainty. "May I examine the document, Lady Margaret?" She handed it to him without hesitation, watching as his expression grew increasingly severe. "This claim has no legal merit whatsoever," he pronounced after careful consideration. "It is a transparent attempt at intimidation, likely prompted by recent events." Lady Margaret sank gracefully into a chair, her mind working rapidly behind her composed exterior. "By recent events you mean my sudden visibility in society. My brother fears I might make an advantageous match that would place me beyond his influence. Or," the Duke suggested with dangerous calm, "someone has deliberately planted this fear in his mind, recognizing his known avarice as fertile ground for manipulation." Their eyes met in mutual understanding, the name of Lady Isolde Fairfax hanging unspoken between them. "What action do you recommend, Your Grace?" Mrs. Pembroke asked, practical despite her distress. The Duke folded the document with precise movements. "First, reassurance. Lady Margaret, this house remains rightfully yours. I give you my word that this baseless claim will not proceed." He paused, his expression softening as he regarded Lady Margaret's pale composure. Second, a counter-offensive. The most effective response to such tactics is to demonstrate their futility. How might one accomplish that? Lady Margaret inquired, her voice steady despite the turmoil beneath. By attending the Whitmore ball tomorrow evening, he replied with quiet determination, on my arm as my officially acknowledged guest. We shall make it abundantly clear that Lady Margaret Elmsworth enjoys protections that render such petty intimidations not merely futile, but counterproductive. As he spoke, Lady Margaret noticed a subtle change in his demeanor, a hardening of resolve that transformed aristocratic reserve into something more formidable. The choice, however, remains entirely yours, he added, his tone gentling. I would not have you feel compelled by circumstance to accept attentions you might otherwise decline. Lady Margaret rose, smoothing her grey silk with hands that betrayed only the slightest tremor. In that moment, something crystallized within her, a resolve born not of desperation but of dignity too long suppressed. I shall be pleased to attend as your guest, Thornvale, she replied, the private address a deliberate choice that did not go unnoticed. Though I fear my evening attire may prove inadequate for such a significant occasion, Mrs. Pembroke brightened immediately. My dear, I believe this presents the perfect opportunity to make use of that blue silk we've been reserving for a special occasion. With your grandmother's pearl hair combs, the effect will be nothing short of triumphant. As the Duke prepared to take his leave, he paused beside Lady Margaret, his voice pitched for her ears alone. Courage in adversity reveals character far more truly than ease in prosperity. You have shown remarkable fortitude today. Later, after he had departed with promises to call the following evening, Mrs. Pembroke regarded Lady Margaret with undisguised concern. My dear, are you entirely certain of your course? The Duke's interest is undeniably flattering, but his world is fraught with complexities you have been mercifully spared until now. Lady Margaret touched the blue ribbon at her wrist, its familiar texture a talisman against uncertainty. I am certain only that dignity requires me to face this challenge, rather than retreat from it. As for the Duke's interest, she paused, allowing herself a rare moment of candor. I find myself equally unable to trust it entirely or dismiss it completely. That night, as she added another entry to her private correspondence, Lady Margaret reflected on how swiftly the current of her life had changed course, from the placid backwater of resignation to the swift, dangerous waters of possibility. The question that troubled her most as she sealed the letter with violet wax was whether she possessed sufficient strength to navigate these unfamiliar currents, or whether, like so many before her, she would find herself dashed against the rocks of society's unforgiving judgment. The Whitmore ballroom blazed with candlelight, every crystal pendant of its magnificent chandeliers refracting brilliance upon the assembled nobility of London. Lady Margaret stood at the entrance, the Duke of Thornvale beside her, acutely aware that for the first time in 17 seasons, her arrival merited genuine attention rather than polite disregard. She had chosen her appearance with unprecedented care, the blue silk gown, preserved for years in anticipation of an occasion that never materialized, now draped her figure with surprising elegance. Her grandmother's pearl combs secured her upswept hair, lending her an air of quiet dignity that complemented the Duke's immaculate formal attire. You appear troubled, he observed, as they prepared to descend the grand staircase. Second thoughts, perhaps? Lady Margaret adjusted her gloves with deliberate calm, merely contemplating the curious sensation of being visible after a lifetime of transparency. It is rather like suddenly finding oneself corporeal after years as a ghost. Something warm flickered in his austere gaze. I assure you, Lady Margaret, there is nothing remotely spectral about your presence this evening. As they descended, the murmur of conversation diminished appreciably, replaced by the rustle of silk and satin as heads turned in their direction. Lady Margaret maintained her composure through long practice, though inwardly she marveled at the transformation in her social reception. Lady Whitmore approaches, the Duke murmured. A formidable ally should one navigate her particular sensibilities with care. The Countess of Whitmore, a magnificent figure whose advanced age had done nothing to diminish her commanding presence, sailed toward them with regal purpose. Her assessment of Lady Margaret was swift and penetrating. So, she pronounced with aristocratic directness, you are the Elmsworth spinster who has captured Thornvale's attention. I confess myself intrigued. The Duke is not known for impulsive attachments. Lady Margaret executed a perfect curtsy. Your ladyship is most kind to receive me. The Duke has been generous enough to introduce me to several artistic and cultural experiences I might otherwise have missed. Lady Whitmore's shrewd gaze shifted between them. Cultural experiences. Indeed. Well, Thornvale, you have succeeded in providing the ton with its most interesting speculation since the Prussian ambassador's gardening enthusiasms. "I expect you to reserve the supper dance for me, Lady Margaret. I wish to take your measure without this looming presence influencing your responses." With that remarkable statement, she swept away to greet other guests, leaving Lady Margaret momentarily speechless. "You have been granted a rare honor," the Duke observed, amusement warming his voice. "Lady Whitmore seldom dances these days, and never with those she considers beneath her notice." Before Lady Margaret could respond, she caught sight of Lady Isolde Fairfax across the room, resplendent in burgundy silk that complemented her golden hair to devastating effect. Their eyes met briefly, Lady Isolde's narrowing in calculation before she turned deliberately to engage Sir Alaric Vane in animated conversation. "I see Sir Alaric has returned from his urgent agricultural matters with remarkable swiftness," Lady Margaret noted. The Duke's expression hardened. Like most parasites, he gravitates toward the most poisonous host available. They moved through the ballroom with measured grace, pausing for introductions that Lady Margaret received with poised acknowledgement. She was acutely aware of the speculative glances, the whispered observations behind fans, the subtle repositioning of various social factions in response to this unexpected development. "Would you care to dance?" the Duke asked, as the orchestra prepared for a quadrille. "Or would you prefer to observe a while longer?" Lady Margaret hesitated only briefly. "I believe I would welcome the clarity of prescribed movement after so much amorphous speculation." As they took their positions, Lady Margaret noticed Clara Pembroke among the dancers, partnered with a serious young man whose attentive manner suggested genuine interest rather than social obligation. Clara's expressive face brightened upon seeing her aunt, a silent communication of encouragement that warmed Lady Margaret unexpectedly. The dance proceeded with mathematical precision, the familiar patterns allowing Lady Margaret's mind to settle into a rhythm of movement and pause, advance and retreat. When it concluded, she found herself approached by several acquaintances whose previous recognition had never extended beyond the most cursory acknowledgement. "You have become quite the celebrity, Lady Margaret," observed Mrs. Harrington, a matron whose social aspirations consistently exceeded her achievement. "One can hardly move through a conversation without your name arising." "How distressing for conversation," Lady Margaret replied with gentle irony. "I had no idea my existence presented such an obstacle to discourse." The Duke, returning from a brief exchange with a military acquaintance, smoothly intervened. "Lady Margaret's modesty prevents her from acknowledging the refreshing effect her authentic character has upon society, grown stale with artifice." As the evening progressed, Lady Margaret gradually became aware of a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Where initially curiosity and speculation had dominated, now something more complex emerged. A tentative reassessment of a woman long dismissed, yet suddenly commanding attention through association with one of society's most eligible widowers. During a momentary respite, as the Duke was engaged in conversation with an elderly peer, Lady Margaret found herself approached by none other than Sir Alaric Vane. His customary mockery was tempered by a new wariness. "Lady Margaret," he greeted her with exaggerated deference, "you appear in uncommon splendor this evening. One might almost fail to recognize the familiar fixture of so many previous gatherings." "Indeed, Sir Alaric," she replied with perfect composure. "How fortunate that you yourself remain so consistently recognizable. Constancy of character is such a rare virtue in these changeable times." He flushed slightly, his ready wit momentarily deserting him. "You seem to have developed unexpected resilience since our last encounter." "Not developed, Sir Alaric, merely revealed. Like many qualities, resilience benefits from occasional demonstration rather than constant display." Before he could formulate a response, Lady Isolde glided to his side with practiced timing. "Sir Alaric, you promised to introduce me to the Russian attaché." Her gaze swept over Lady Margaret with calculated dismissal. "Lady Margaret, what an unexpected pleasure to see you in such vivid attire. One grows so accustomed to more subdued presentations that the transformation is quite remarkable." Lady Margaret met her gaze with serene dignity. "Change, Lady Isolde, is the privilege of the living. Stagnation belongs properly to the grave." Something dangerous flashed in Lady Isolde's green eyes. How philosophical! Though one must be cautious, change invited by artificial circumstances often proves dismayingly temporary, whereas change emerging from authentic recognition tends toward permanence, came the Duke's voice as he rejoined their circle. "Lady Margaret, I believe Lady Whitmore awaits your promised dance." As Lady Margaret moved away, she overheard Lady Isolde's low, venomous murmur. She'll never belong in your world, Thornvale. This pathetic masquerade only emphasizes the disparity. The Duke's response, equally soft but carrying an edge of steel. The only masquerade I observe, Lady Fairfax, is the disguise of benevolence over malice. It grows increasingly transparent. The supper dance with Lady Whitmore proved a surprisingly invigorating experience. The elderly Countess possessed both sharp wit and sharper perception, her questions direct yet never cruel. "You have known disappointment intimately, I think," she observed as they completed a turn, "yet maintained dignity throughout. A rare quality in any era, but particularly in ours, where grievance is so often mistaken for character." Lady Margaret was momentarily startled by this unexpected insight. "Your ladyship is most perceptive." "I am most observant," Lady Whitmore corrected. "There is a distinction. Now tell me truthfully, what do you make of Thornvale's attention? Is it welcome or merely expedient given your brother's disgraceful behavior?" The directness of the question momentarily robbed Lady Margaret of her practiced composure. "I can confess myself uncertain of its nature or purpose. The Duke has shown remarkable kindness, but—" "Kindness," Lady Whitmore interrupted with a dismissive sniff. "Thornvale is just, honourable, and occasionally generous. But kind? No. The man calculates every action with military precision. If he has singled you out, Lady Margaret, it is because he perceives something of value that others have overlooked." As the dance concluded, Lady Whitmore fixed her with a penetrating stare. "Whatever game Lady Fairfax believes herself to be playing, remember this: she competes not merely against you, but against the formidable judgment of a man who has never been swayed by mere ornament. That is why she fears you. That is why she will escalate her efforts to undermine your position." With this unsettling prediction, Lady Whitmore departed, leaving Lady Margaret to contemplate the increasingly complex web of social and personal dynamics surrounding her unexpected prominence. Later, as she stood observing the dancing from a momentary solitude, Lady Margaret became aware of hushed voices from behind a nearby pillar. Lady Isolde and Sir Alaric, their tones urgent with conspiracy. "The solicitor's letter was merely the opening gambit," Lady Isolde was saying. "Lord Elmsworth requires more persuasive evidence." "The journal entries should suffice," Sir Alaric replied, "most illuminating regarding her sentiments toward the Duke, pathetically ardent for a woman of her years and circumstances." Lady Margaret felt a cold wave of comprehension. Her private correspondence, the letters written to herself chronicling thoughts never meant for other eyes. Somehow they had gained access or planned to do so imminently. "And you're certain the Duke remains unaware of her financial circumstances?" Lady Isolde continued. "The mortgages, the dwindling annuity?" "Entirely. He sees only the dignified facade, not the desperation beneath. When revealed, her motivation will appear transparently mercenary." Lady Margaret stepped backward, unwilling to hear more, yet unable to unhear what had already been revealed. As she retreated, she collided with a solid presence, the Duke himself, his expression suggesting he had overheard at least a portion of the exchange. "Lady Margaret," he said, his voice carrying for the benefit of those behind the pillar, "I believe you promised me this dance." As he led her onto the floor, his hand at her waist steadied her visibly shaken composure. "I gather you overheard something disturbing," he murmured, as they began to move in perfect synchronization. "They have accessed or intend to access my private correspondence," she replied, her voice barely audible above the music. "Letters written only to myself, never intended for other eyes, and they plan to use my financial circumstances to suggest mercenary motivation." His expression didn't change, but she felt his hand tighten fractionally at her waist. "Is there truth to their claims regarding your finances?" Lady Margaret hesitated, pride warring with honesty. "There is difficulty," she admitted finally. "The house is mortgaged to maintain appearances. My annuity diminishes annually. I have sold several pieces of jewelry to meet unexpected expenses." The Duke guided her through a turn with flawless precision. "Yet you have never sought assistance nor complained of hardship. What purpose would complaint serve, save to burden others with matters they cannot remedy?" she replied with simple dignity. "One endures what one must." Something shifted in his gaze, a softening, a deepening that made Lady Margaret suddenly aware of their physical proximity in a way that transcended social convention. "We shall discuss this matter further tomorrow," he said, as the dance concluded. "For now, it is imperative we present an untroubled appearance. Lady Isolde must not suspect we are aware of her machinations." The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of conversation and formality, Lady Margaret maintaining her composure through force of will, despite the knowledge that her most private thoughts had been or soon would be violated for the purpose of public humiliation. As the Duke's carriage bore them away from the ball, silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but weighted with unspoken concerns. "I shall call tomorrow at 2, he said finally as they approached her residence. "We have much to discuss, not least the security of your private papers and the legal status of your property." Lady Margaret gazed out at the lamplit streets, her reflection ghostly in the carriage window. "I fear I have become an unconscionable burden, Thornvale. This was not my intention." He regarded her with that penetrating intensity that seemed to see beyond all social pretense. "You have become many things in my estimation, Lady Margaret, but a burden is not among them." As he handed her down from the carriage, he retained her gloved hand a moment longer than necessary. "Until tomorrow," he said, his voice carrying a note she had not heard before, something almost resembling tenderness. Later, as Lady Margaret secured her grandmother's pearl combs in their velvet case, she caught sight of herself in the dressing-table mirror. The woman who gazed back seemed simultaneously familiar and strange, the same features that had looked back at her for decades, yet somehow altered by recent events. She touched the blue ribbon at her wrist, its texture a tangible link to her former self, even as circumstances conspired to transform her present and future. What had begun as a simple act of kindness, the Duke's intervention against Sir Alaric's Mockery, had escalated into a complex web of social warfare with herself at its center. Yet beneath her apprehension lay something unexpected, a kernel of determination that had lain dormant through years of patient endurance. Whatever Lady Isolde might reveal about her private thoughts or financial straits, Lady Margaret Elmsworth would face the revelation with the same quiet dignity that had sustained her through 17 seasons of indifference. With that resolve firming her spine, she extinguished her candle and prepared for whatever tomorrow might bring. Morning brought a letter bearing the Elmsworth seal, delivered by a solemn-faced footman whose expression suggested he anticipated an unpleasant response. Lady Margaret received the missive in her small study, where she had been reviewing household accounts with increasingly obvious concern. The letter, written in her brother's precise hand, wasted no time on familial pleasantries. "Margaret, your recent activities have drawn unwelcome attention to our family name. I am informed by reliable sources that you have engaged in behavior unbecoming a woman of your years and station, pursuing a connection with the Duke of Thornvale in a manner that has provoked considerable speculation. Furthermore, evidence has come to light suggesting financial irregularities in your management of Aunt Agatha's bequest. I require your presence at Elmsworth Hall this Saturday to discuss these matters and determine an appropriate course of action. A carriage will be sent. Your brother, Lord Elmsworth." Lady Margaret refolded the letter with steady hands, though her heart beat a rapid tattoo against her ribs. The threat was clear, if unstated. Public exposure of her private financial struggles, combined with insinuations about her relationship with the Duke. Her brother had always been susceptible to manipulation, particularly when it aligned with his financial interests. "Troubling news?" inquired Mrs. Pembroke, who had been discreetly examining a frayed curtain in need of repair. "My brother requests my presence at Elmsworth Hall," Lady Margaret replied, her tone carefully neutral. "He expresses concern regarding recent events." Mrs. Pembroke snorted with unladylike vigor. "Concern? That man wouldn't recognize genuine concern if it arrived with a brass band and formal introduction. Who has been whispering in his ear, I wonder?" Lady Margaret was spared the necessity of response by the arrival of Clara, who burst into the room with her characteristic energy, her expression unusually serious. "Aunt Margaret, you must hear what I've discovered." She paused, noticing the letter still in her aunt's hand. "Oh dear, has Uncle Elmsworth written? I feared as much when I overheard Lady Fairfax at Madame Delacroix's shop this morning." Lady Margaret's attention sharpened. "What did you overhear, Clara?" She was speaking with Lady Harrington, not bothering to lower her voice, mind you, about how poor Lord Elmsworth must be mortified by his sister's transparent attempts to secure the Duke through pathetic appeals to his compassion. She specifically mentioned financial improprieties and private writings of an embarrassing nature. Clara's expressive face reflected indignation. "It was horrible, Aunt," as though she wanted to be overheard. "Of course she did," Mrs. Pembroke interjected. "The woman is establishing her narrative before any contrary evidence can emerge, a common tactic among those who traffic in malice rather than truth." Lady Margaret rose and moved to the window, gazing out at the small garden where spring bulbs were just beginning to emerge. "It appears Lady Isolde has decided upon a comprehensive strategy. My brother's letter suggests he has accepted her version of events without reservation." "But surely the Duke will intervene?" Clara asked, her youthful faith in justice still intact despite recent evidence of its rarity. "The Duke has his own reputation to consider," Lady Margaret replied quietly. "Association with a financially compromised spinster, accused of inappropriate sentiments, hardly enhances his standing." A discreet knock at the door heralded the butler's appearance. "Mr. Edmund Harcourt to see you, my lady." The unexpected visitor entered with dignified purpose. A distinguished gentleman of middle years, whose impeccable attire and bearing suggested a position of significant responsibility. "Lady Margaret," he greeted her with a formal bow. "I apologize for calling without prior arrangement. I am Edmund Harcourt, the Duke of Thornvale's personal secretary and solicitor." Lady Margaret's composure slipped momentarily before she recovered. "Mr. Harcourt, this is indeed unexpected. May I present Mrs. Pembroke and my niece, Lady Clara?" After brief acknowledgements, Mr. Harcourt addressed Lady Margaret with direct efficiency. "His Grace regrets he is unable to call at the appointed hour today. Urgent business has required his presence at the House of Lords. He has, however, instructed me to address several matters of immediate concern." He removed a leather portfolio from his coat. "First, regarding the communication you received from your brother's solicitor. I have prepared a comprehensive response confirming the legal validity of your aunt's bequest. It has been delivered this morning with supporting documentation from the original trustees." Lady Margaret blinked in surprise. "That is most efficient, Mr. Harcourt." "Efficiency is required when confronting deliberate obfuscation," he replied with quiet conviction. "Second, His Grace suggests that certain private papers might benefit from more secure storage until the present difficulties are resolved." Understanding dawned. "My personal correspondence." Mr. Harcourt nodded, his expression revealing nothing beyond professional concern. "Precisely. His Grace has arranged for a secure cabinet to be delivered this afternoon. It features a lock of particular sophistication, the key to which will remain exclusively in your possession." Lady Margaret felt a complex mixture of gratitude and discomfort. The Duke's consideration was evident, yet the necessity for such measures underscored the gravity of her situation. "And third," Mr. Harcourt continued, producing an official-looking document, "His Grace requests your authorization to have his personal solicitors examine the mortgage on this property with a view toward restructuring the terms to your advantage." At this, Lady Margaret's carefully maintained composure finally faltered. "Mr. Harcourt, while I appreciate His Grace's concern, I cannot possibly accept such intervention in my financial affairs. It would be entirely inappropriate and would only serve to validate Lady Isolde's insinuations regarding my motivations." Mr. Harcourt regarded her with unexpected warmth. "Lady Margaret, if I may speak candidly, I have served the Duke for 17 years. In that time, I have observed his judgment regarding character proven correct in every instance. If he has chosen to extend his protection, it is because he has determined you worthy of it, not because he has been manipulated into offering it." He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. "The Duke authorized me to share certain information should you express such concerns. In particular, he wished you to know that he is fully aware of Lady Fairfax's machinations, including her role in encouraging your brother's intervention and her attempts to access your private correspondence." "How could he possibly know the extent of her involvement?" Mrs. Pembroke asked, her protective instincts evident. Mr. Harcourt's expression suggested he had anticipated this question. "His Grace maintains connections in various circles. Lady Fairfax was indiscreet in her communications with Sir Alaric Vane, who, it transpires, has accumulated gambling debts to several of the Duke's acquaintances. When pressed for repayment, Sir Alaric proved forthcoming. Regarding certain schemes in which he had been enlisted." Clara gasped in delighted shock. "Do you mean the Duke has been gathering evidence against Lady Fairfax all this time?" "I would not characterize it precisely in those terms, Lady Clara," Mr. Harcourt replied with diplomatic caution. "His Grace simply ensures he is well informed regarding matters that concern him." Lady Margaret's mind raced, reassessing recent events in light of this revelation. The Duke's attentions had seemed spontaneous, even impulsive, qualities at odds with his reputation for careful deliberation. Yet if Mr. Harcourt spoke truly, his actions had been informed by a more comprehensive understanding than she had realized. "There is one additional matter," Mr. Harcourt said, retrieving a small velvet box from his coat. "His Grace requested I deliver this personally." Lady Margaret accepted the box with visible hesitation, opening it to reveal an exquisite brooch of sapphires and pearls, arranged in a pattern of subtle elegance. "He asks that you wear this to Lady Whitmore's musical evening tomorrow," Mr. Harcourt explained. "He will call for you at 7 should you wish to attend." The implied choice was clear, as was the statement such an appearance would make. Lady Margaret studied the brooch, its beauty undeniable, yet its significance potentially problematic. "Mr. Harcourt," she said finally, "I find myself in the uncomfortable position of being deeply grateful for His Grace's intervention, yet concerned about its implications. This gift, while beautiful, could be misconstrued by those already disposed to question my motivations." "If I may, Lady Margaret," Mr. Harcourt replied with quiet confidence, "His Grace anticipated this concern. The brooch belonged to his mother, the late Duchess. It is offered not as a gift that creates obligation, but as the loan of a family piece that signals position. The distinction is subtle but significant in society's calculus." Mrs. Pembroke, who had been uncharacteristically silent, now spoke with decisive approval. "The man thinks of everything. Margaret, you must accept. It is a masterful countermove in this ridiculous game Lady Isolde has initiated." Lady Margaret remained uncertain. "Even if I accept the brooch as a temporary loan, there remains the matter of my brother's summons. He expects me at Elmsworth Hall on Saturday." "Ah, yes," Mr. Harcourt said, producing yet another document. "His Grace suggested that a prior commitment might necessitate postponing that particular interview. Lady Whitmore has expressly requested your presence at her country estate this weekend for a small gathering. Her invitation arrived this morning." He presented an elegantly penned card bearing the Whitmore crest, a clear counterweight to Lord Elmsworth's demand, issued by a social authority even he would hesitate to defy. Clara clapped her hands in delight. "Lady Whitmore never hosts small gatherings. This is unprecedented." Lady Margaret accepted the invitation with visible bewilderment. "I cannot fathom why she would extend such a courtesy to someone she hardly knows." "Lady Whitmore," Mr. Harcourt observed with careful neutrality, "values substance over spectacle and authenticity over artifice, qualities she apparently detected during your conversation at the ball." As Mr. Harcourt prepared to take his leave, Lady Margaret found herself simultaneously reassured and unsettled by the extent of the Duke's strategic intervention in her affairs. The precise, comprehensive nature of his response to Lady Isolde's machinations suggested not merely passing interest, but committed involvement. "Please convey my gratitude to His Grace," she said, as she accompanied Mr. Harcourt to the door, "and my acceptance of Lady Whitmore's kind invitation." Once the visitor had departed, Mrs. Pembroke regarded Lady Margaret with shrewd assessment. "Well, my dear, it appears you have acquired formidable allies in this unexpected battle. The question that remains is whether you are prepared for what such alliance might ultimately entail." "I am not entirely certain I understand your meaning," Lady Margaret replied, though the slight colour in her cheeks suggested otherwise. "Don't you?" Mrs. Pembroke's expression softened. "The Duke of Thornvale does not deploy his considerable resources frivolously, Margaret. His interest appears to extend beyond mere chivalry or momentary diversion." Clara, whose romantic nature had been thoroughly engaged by recent events, sighed happily. "It's like a novel come to life. The overlooked heroine, the noble Duke, the villainous beauty thwarted by true affection. Life," Lady Margaret reminded her gently, "rarely conforms to literary conventions, my dear, and heroines in novels are seldom 32 with mortgaged properties and dwindling annuities." Yet as she returned to her study, Lady Margaret found herself contemplating the sapphire brooch with complex emotions. Whatever the Duke's ultimate intentions, his actions had irrevocably altered her position in society's elaborate hierarchy. From invisible fixture to subject of intense speculation in the space of a week, the transformation was as disorienting as it was unprecedented. That evening, as she penned a carefully worded response to her brother explaining her prior commitment to Lady Whitmore, Lady Margaret allowed herself to consider, for the first time, the possibility that the Duke's interest might be genuine rather than strategic. The thought was simultaneously exhilarating and terrifying, a disruption to 17 years of carefully managed expectations. With the blue ribbon still secured at her wrist, she sealed her letter with violet wax, wondering what new developments tomorrow's musical evening might bring, and whether she possessed sufficient courage to meet them with the same dignity that had sustained her through years of quiet resignation. Lady Whitmore's musical evening had attracted London's most refined circles, transforming her elegant townhouse into a sanctuary of cultural appreciation. The drawing room had been arranged to accommodate both performers and audience with tasteful efficiency, gilt chairs positioned in neat rows before the grand pianoforte where a renowned Italian soprano would later perform. Lady Margaret arrived precisely at 7, the Duke's sapphire brooch secured at her modest neckline. She wore a gown of silver-grey silk, not the finest in the room, yet possessing a quiet elegance that complemented her natural dignity. The Duke of Thornvale, resplendent in evening attire, maintained a solicitous presence at her side, his attentions neither excessive nor perfunctory, but calibrated with perfect awareness of their social significance. "You appear thoughtful this evening," he observed as they exchanged greetings with various acquaintances. "Has something troubled you beyond our previous discussions?" Lady Margaret adjusted her gloves with deliberate care. "I received a second letter from my brother this morning. His tone suggests Lady Isolde's influence has grown rather than diminished. He threatens to make public certain financial irregularities, unless I return to Elmsworth Hall immediately." The Duke's expression remained composed, though she detected a subtle tightening at the corners of his mouth. "What response have you made?" "I reiterated my commitment to Lady Whitmore's invitation," she replied, "though I confess the prospect of public humiliation weighs heavily. One endures private struggles with greater fortitude than public exposure." Before he could respond, Lady Whitmore herself approached, her formidable presence drawing immediate attention despite her advanced years. "Lady Margaret," she greeted with unusual warmth, "I am delighted you accepted my invitation for the weekend. We shall have ample opportunity to continue our most interesting conversation from the ball. Thornvale, you will escort her down naturally." It was not a question but an imperial declaration. The Duke inclined his head with respectful deference. "I would be honoured, Lady Whitmore, provided Lady Margaret has no objection." Lady Whitmore's shrewd gaze assessed them both. "Objection? Nonsense. The matter is settled." She leaned closer to Lady Margaret, her voice lowered conspiratorially. "Lady Fairfax arrives momentarily. Be prepared for escalation. The woman possesses no subtlety when thwarted." With that warning, she swept away to greet other guests, leaving Lady Margaret to contemplate this latest development. Her contemplation was interrupted by the arrival of Clara, accompanied by the same serious young gentleman from the ball. "Aunt Margaret, Your Grace," Clara performed a graceful curtsy. "May I present Mr. Thomas Elmsworth? My uncle has finally permitted me to acknowledge my cousin in public." Lady Margaret's surprise was evident. "Thomas, I hardly recognized you. It has been, 5 years since your father forbade our association?" The young man bowed with sincere respect. "Nearly 6, Aunt Margaret. Father's dictates regarding family connections have been extensive." He glanced at Clara with undisguised admiration. It was Lady Clara who convinced him that continued estrangement from his own son's favourite aunt represented poor strategy in current circumstances. The Duke regarded Thomas with quiet assessment. "Mr. Elmsworth, your reputation at Cambridge was exemplary, I understand. Professor Thornhill speaks highly of your contributions to mathematical discourse." Thomas's expression reflected surprise at this knowledge. "Your Grace is remarkably well informed about obscure academic achievements. I find merit warrants attention regardless of its sphere," the Duke replied. "Your aunt's accomplishments have similarly been overlooked by those lacking discernment." A sudden hush in conversation signalled a new arrival. Lady Isolde Fairfax stood in the entrance, her burgundy gown emphasizing her striking colouring to dramatic effect. Her calculating gaze swept the assembly before settling upon Lady Margaret with predatory focus. "How fascinating," she observed, gliding toward them with practiced grace. "A family reunion of sorts. Mr. Elmsworth, I believe your father expected you at Elmsworth Hall this weekend. He mentioned your imminent arrival when we spoke yesterday." Thomas's expression remained composed. "My plans have altered, Lady Fairfax. I find London's intellectual offerings more compelling at present." Lady Isolde's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Indeed, how disappointing for Lord Elmsworth. He seemed quite determined to gather the family for certain important discussions." Her gaze shifted to the sapphire brooch at Lady Margaret's neckline, recognition flaring briefly in her eyes. "What a remarkable adornment, Lady Margaret, quite beyond what one typically associates with your usual restraint." "The Thornvale sapphires," the Duke stated with deliberate clarity, ensuring nearby guests could overhear. "My mother wore them frequently at similar gatherings. I find they complement Lady Margaret's natural elegance perfectly." Now the implied status of the jewels, family heirlooms rather than recent gifts, registered immediately in Lady Isolde's expression. Her strategy required recalibration. "How sentimental," she replied, her voice honeyed with false warmth. Though one wonders if the late Duchess would approve their current placement, she was, after all, rather particular about family traditions. The Duke's response carried an edge of steel beneath its polished surface. "My mother valued authentic character above all considerations. Her approval would be emphatically assured." Lady Isolde's composure faltered momentarily before she regained her social mask. "Character is indeed valuable, particularly when presented without embellishment or concealment." The implicit threat hung in the air between them. Before the Duke could respond, however, Lady Whitmore announced the commencement of the musical program, directing guests to their seats with aristocratic authority. As the soprano began her first aria, a poignant piece from Bellini's latest opera, Lady Margaret found herself seated beside the Duke in the second row, acutely conscious of Lady Isolde's presence directly behind them. The music's melancholy beauty provided temporary respite from social tensions, allowing her mind to drift momentarily from immediate concerns. The Duke leaned closer, his voice a discreet murmur beneath the soaring notes. "Your nephew appears a young man of principle. His support arrives at a fortuitous moment. Thomas was always the family conscience," she replied softly. "His estrangement was perhaps my brother's most unforgivable act. Yet he returns precisely when needed," the Duke observed. "Sometimes separation merely strengthens genuine connection." The significance of his words lingered as the aria concluded, drawing appreciative applause. During the brief interlude before the next performance, Lady Whitmore approached their seats with determined purpose. "A word, Lady Margaret. In the library, if you please." Her tone permitted no refusal. With a questioning glance toward the Duke, who offered a reassuring nod, Lady Margaret followed her formidable hostess through the adjacent room into a magnificent library lined with leather-bound volumes from floor to ceiling. "I shall be direct," Lady Whitmore announced once the door closed behind them. "Lady Fairfax has been circulating certain rumors regarding your financial circumstances and private correspondence. She intends to make explicit accusations during supper, having arranged for your brother's solicitor to arrive with evidence of mismanagement and impropriety." Lady Margaret's composure wavered momentarily. "I see. Then perhaps I should withdraw before such unpleasantness disrupts your gathering." Lady Whitmore's expression sharpened. "Nonsense. Withdrawal concedes victory to malice, an unacceptable outcome." She moved to an ornate desk and removed a small packet of letters tied with faded ribbon. "These arrived by special messenger an hour ago. Your brother's solicitor, it seems, employs a clerk with greater loyalty to justice than to his employer. The evidence they intended to present has been intercepted." Lady Margaret stared in disbelief at the packet, recognizing her own handwriting on the exposed edge of one letter. "My private correspondence. They actually obtained it. Through methods that would provoke legal consequences if exposed," Lady Whitmore confirmed. "The clerk's accompanying note details payments to a housemaid for access to your writing desk. The entire scheme reeks of desperation and criminality." She placed the letters firmly in Lady Margaret's hands. "These belong solely to you. Their contents remain private, their violation inexcusable." Emotion threatened to overwhelm Lady Margaret's careful composure. "I lack words to express my gratitude, Lady Whitmore." The elderly countess waved aside her thanks with aristocratic impatience. "Save your gratitude for more deserving occasions. This intervention serves justice, not charity." She fixed Lady Margaret with a penetrating stare. "Now we must determine how best to neutralize Lady Fairfax's schemes without descending to her methods." "Must we respond at all?" Lady Margaret asked. With the letters safely returned, perhaps silence would prove most effective. Lady Whitmore considered this suggestion with evident approval. "Interesting. You propose allowing her to make accusations she cannot substantiate, thus revealing her malice without dignifying it through defense." "Precisely. Denial lends credibility to falsehood. Composed silence forces truth to emerge through its own weight." A rare smile transformed Lady Whitmore's austere features. "Thornvale has chosen more wisely than I initially suspected. Your strategic instincts match your personal dignity, a compelling combination." When they returned to the drawing room, the Duke rose immediately, his questioning gaze meeting Lady Margaret's with evident concern. She offered a subtle nod of reassurance as she resumed her seat beside him. "All is well," she murmured as the next performance began. "Better than expected, in fact." The remainder of the musical program passed in relative tranquility, though Lady Margaret remained acutely aware of Lady Isolde's calculating presence behind them. When the entertainment concluded and guests began moving toward the supper room, the anticipated confrontation materialized with theatrical precision. "Lady Margaret," Lady Isolde called, her voice pitched to carry throughout the assembly, "I believe there's a matter of some urgency we should address before supper. Your brother's solicitor has provided certain documents regarding financial irregularities that demand immediate attention." A hush fell over the gathering, faces turning toward this unexpected drama with varying degrees of shock and avid interest. Lady Margaret felt the familiar heat of humiliation threatening to rise, yet steadied herself with quiet resolve. "How thoughtful of you to express concern for my private affairs, Lady Fairfax," she replied. her voice clear and composed, though I confess some puzzlement regarding your involvement in matters that concern only my family and myself. Lady Isolde's smile tightened. When impropriety affects wider society, concern becomes a social responsibility, particularly when certain connections have been pursued under false pretenses. The Duke stepped forward, his expression dangerously controlled. Lady Fairfax, you tread perilously close to slander, a precarious position even for one of your social standing. Slander requires falsehood, Your Grace, Lady Isolde countered. I merely referenced documented facts regarding Lady Margaret's financial desperation and her, shall we say, long-standing fixation on elevating her circumstances through strategic attachment. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Lady Whitmore, who had been observing with calculating patience, now intervened with devastating precision. Documentation, Lady Fairfax? Obtained through what means, precisely? Perhaps you might enlighten us regarding payments to Lady Margaret's housemaid, or instructions to access private correspondence without authorization. The blood drained from Lady Isolde's perfect features. I have no knowledge of such matters. My information comes directly from Lord Elmsworth's solicitor. Indeed. Thomas Elmsworth stepped forward, his youthful face grave with purpose. As my father's heir and a practicing solicitor myself, I find myself curious about legal representatives acting without proper authorization. Perhaps you would name this individual who claims to represent our family's interests. Lady Isolde's composure visibly cracked. Her gaze darted toward the entrance where the promised reinforcement had failed to materialize. This is absurd. I merely sought to protect the Duke from manipulation by a woman whose financial desperation has driven her to what, precisely? The Duke interrupted, his voice carrying that edge of steel that had silenced more formidable opponents. To conducting herself with unfailing dignity, despite circumstances that would crush lesser spirits, to maintaining grace and integrity while subject to malicious speculation, to demonstrating qualities of character that certain individuals might profitably emulate. Lady Isolde's face flushed with mortification as she recognized her miscalculation. Without substantiating evidence, her accusations appeared precisely what they were: malicious fabrications born of jealousy and thwarted ambition. You mistake my intentions entirely, she attempted, though her usual poise had abandoned her. I merely thought— No, Lady Margaret said quietly, the simple negative silencing the room through its unexpected authority. You did not think, Lady Fairfax. You calculated. There is a profound distinction. In that moment of perfect clarity, Lady Margaret felt something shift irrevocably, not merely in society's perception of her, but in her own understanding of her worth. 17 seasons of patience, dignity, and quiet endurance had forged a strength that Lady Isolde's brittle beauty and social machinations could neither comprehend nor overcome. Lady Whitmore, with impeccable timing, announced supper was served, dispersing the tense gathering with aristocratic efficiency. As guests proceeded toward the dining room, Lady Isolde remained momentarily isolated, her social triumph transformed into humiliating defeat through the simple power of truth unveiled. Later, as Lady Margaret found herself seated in a position of honor near Lady Whitmore, the elderly Countess leaned close with rare approval. Perfectly executed, the woman will think twice before attempting such transparent schemes again. I fear we have only witnessed the opening movements of a longer composition, Lady Margaret replied. Humiliation often breeds more determined malice. Then we shall be prepared for subsequent movements, the Duke observed from her other side, though I suspect Lady Isolde may find her resources significantly diminished after tonight's performance. As supper progressed, Lady Margaret became aware of a subtle transformation in her reception. Where curiosity and speculation had previously dominated, now something resembling respect had emerged. Not universal, certainly, but sufficient to alter the atmosphere surrounding her. Thomas approached as the evening concluded, his expression reflecting genuine warmth. Aunt Margaret, I cannot express how deeply I regret my absence during recent years. Had I known the extent of certain difficulties, I would have defied my father's dictates much sooner. You are here now, she replied simply, and your support this evening was invaluable. He glanced toward Clara, who was engaged in animated conversation nearby. Lady Clara's intervention proved pivotal. She approached me at Cambridge last week with remarkable determination, informing me in no uncertain terms that family loyalty required immediate attention. Lady Margaret followed his gaze, noting with interest the evident affection in his expression. Clara possesses surprising reserves of character beneath her youthful enthusiasm. Indeed, Thomas hesitated, then added with careful emphasis, "I have accepted a position with a respected legal firm in London. My residence here will be permanent, allowing more frequent family connection moving forward." The significance of this statement, its implications for both her ongoing protection and his evident interest in Clara, did not escape Lady Margaret's notice. "I am delighted to hear it. Family connections should be nurtured rather than severed." As the Duke's carriage bore them home through London's lamplit streets, a comfortable silence settled between them, the quiet of shared understanding rather than awkward absence. "You handled yourself with remarkable composure this evening," he observed finally. Few could have maintained such dignity under similar provocation. Lady Margaret gazed at the passing shadows, her thoughts momentarily distant. "Dignity has been my sole consistent possession these 17 years, Thornvale. When one has little else, one guards it most preciously. Yet you possess far more than mere dignity," he replied, his tone carrying an unusual warmth. "Courage, intelligence, compassion, strategic acumen, qualities I have observed with increasing admiration since our first substantive conversation." She turned toward him, the carriage's interior shadows softening his austere features. "You credit me with virtues born of necessity rather than choice. Had circumstances favored me differently, perhaps I would have developed less admirable characteristics." "I disagree," he said with quiet certainty. "Character reveals itself most truthfully under duress. Adversity does not create quality, it merely unveils what was always present." As the carriage arrived at her residence, the Duke accompanied her to the door with formal courtesy. Yet, as they reached the threshold, he retained her gloved hand a moment longer than propriety dictated. "I shall call tomorrow to discuss arrangements for Lady Whitmore's country gathering," he said. "There are several matters of significance I wish to address before we depart London." The weight of unspoken meaning in his statement lingered as Lady Margaret entered her home, her mind simultaneously exhausted and strangely alert. Tonight's events had shifted something fundamental in her circumstances, yet whether toward resolution or greater complexity remained uncertain. Later, as she secured her rescued correspondence in the Duke's provided cabinet, Lady Margaret touched the sapphire brooch still pinned at her neckline. Family jewels worn publicly, a statement of connection and protection more powerful than mere words could convey. For the first time in 17 years, Lady Margaret Elmsworth fell asleep without writing in her private letters. Tonight, perhaps, there was nothing that required chronicling beyond reach of memory. Lady Whitmore's country estate, Thornfield Park, embodied centuries of aristocratic tradition without sacrificing comfort to grandeur. The journey from London had been pleasant, despite its significance, Lady Margaret travelling in Lady Whitmore's personal carriage, while the Duke followed separately with Thomas Elmsworth. This arrangement, clearly orchestrated by their formidable hostess, had afforded Lady Margaret valuable time for private conversation with the elderly Countess. "You remain unnecessarily guarded," Lady Whitmore observed as their carriage traversed the final miles of country road. "Thornvale's intentions are transparently serious, yet you maintain a posture of careful uncertainty." Lady Margaret adjusted her travelling gloves with deliberate precision. "Experience has taught me the value of measured expectation, my lady, particularly when circumstances suggest an imbalance of position and power." Position and power. Lady Whitmore dismissed these considerations with aristocratic impatience. Such concerns belong properly to ambitious girls seeking advantageous matches, not to women of substance evaluating genuine connection. Her shrewd gaze assessed Lady Margaret with unnerving perception. "You fear he acts from chivalry rather than genuine attachment, a reasonable concern, perhaps, given the theatrical nature of recent events. Yet I have known Thornvale since his birth, watched him grow from serious boy to formidable man. He does nothing from mere obligation that could be discharged through simpler means." This observation lingered in Lady Margaret's thoughts as they arrived at Thornfield Park, its elegant facade gleaming golden in the late afternoon sunlight. Servants efficiently managed luggage, while Lady Whitmore directed the distribution of chambers with precise authority. "Lady Margaret will occupy the blue suite," she informed her housekeeper. "The Duke takes the oak chamber as usual, Mr. Elmsworth in the east wing, Lady Clara and Mrs. Pembroke in the connecting rooms overlooking the rose garden." The strategic placement of guests, particularly the proximity of her own chamber to the Duke's, did not escape Lady Margaret's notice. Lady Whitmore orchestrated social dynamics with the same precision a military commander deployed troops. The blue suite proved an elegant apartment of interconnected rooms decorated in subtle shades of azure and silver. As Lady Margaret refreshed herself after the journey, Clara arrived in a flurry of excitement. "Aunt Margaret, have you seen the grounds?" There's the most beautiful lake with actual swans. And Thomas says the library contains first editions of poetry volumes impossible to find elsewhere. Her expressive face glowed with enthusiasm. It's also perfectly arranged, almost as though Lady Whitmore planned every detail for maximum dramatic effect. I suspect she did precisely that, Lady Margaret replied, smiling at her niece's exuberance. Lady Whitmore strikes me as someone who leaves little to chance in matters she considers significant. Clara sobered momentarily, perching on the window seat with unusual thoughtfulness. Do you know who is not here? Lady Fairfax. She was explicitly not invited, despite her usual inclusion in such gatherings. Thomas says it represents a decisive social statement. Lady Whitmore does not appear to make statements by half measures, Lady Margaret observed, arranging her hair with simple elegance for dinner. Clara hesitated, then asked with careful neutrality, "Are you prepared for what might occur this weekend?" Thomas believes, that is, many expect, certain developments of a significant nature. Lady Margaret paused, hairpin suspended mid-motion. "Clara, dearest, while I appreciate your concern, I would caution against excessive expectation. The Duke has shown remarkable kindness in challenging circumstances, but—" "Kindness?" Clara interrupted with uncharacteristic vehemence. "Aunt Margaret, the man has systematically dismantled every obstacle to your security and reputation. He wears his intentions as clearly as that sapphire brooch he placed around your neck." Before Lady Margaret could formulate a response, a discreet knock announced Mrs. Pembroke's arrival. "Lady Whitmore has arranged informal gatherings in the drawing-room before dinner," she informed them. "And Margaret, you should know, your brother has apparently arrived unexpectedly at the gatehouse, demanding entry." Lady Margaret's composure faltered momentarily. "Lord Elmsworth? Here? But how? Lady Whitmore has refused him entrance to the main house," Mrs. Pembroke continued with evident satisfaction. "She suggests you might wish to meet him in the estate office with Mr. Thomas as your representative, should you choose to receive him at all." The implicit support, Lady Whitmore's formidable authority combined with Thomas's legal expertise, provided unexpected reassurance. Lady Margaret considered her options with careful deliberation. "I shall see him," she decided finally, "with Thomas present. Avoiding confrontation merely postpones inevitable resolution." In the estate office, a handsome room of polished oak and leather-bound ledgers, Lord Elmsworth awaited with barely contained indignation. His florid countenance and agitated manner contrasted sharply with Thomas's composed presence and Lady Margaret's quiet dignity. "This is outrageous," Lord Elmsworth began without preamble, "refusing my carriage's entry, directing me to wait in what amounts to a glorified steward's office. Do you have any conception of the embarrassment you have caused our family name?" Lady Margaret regarded her brother with calm assessment. "Good afternoon, Richard. I trust your journey was not too taxing." Her composure clearly inflamed his agitation. "Do not adopt that tone with me, Margaret. I have received deeply concerning reports regarding your behavior in London, pursuing connection with the Duke through shameless exploitation of his charitable nature, financial improprieties, with Aunt Agatha's bequest, private correspondence of an explicit nature. The entire situation is beyond scandal." Thomas intervened with professional authority. "Father, as a practicing solicitor, I must caution you regarding potentially slanderous accusations without substantiating evidence, particularly given recent developments regarding illegally obtained private papers." Lord Elmsworth blinked in confusion. "What developments?" "Lady Fairfax assured me the evidence was irrefutable." "Lady Fairfax," Thomas replied with careful precision, "orchestrated criminal access to Aunt Margaret's private correspondence through bribery of household staff, actions for which she could face serious legal consequences should Aunt Margaret choose to pursue them." Uncertainty flickered across Lord Elmsworth's expression. "But the financial irregularities exist entirely in Lady Fairfax's imagination," Thomas interrupted firmly. "I have personally reviewed all financial records pertaining to Aunt Agatha's bequest. They demonstrate exemplary management under challenging circumstances, including repayment of debts you yourself incurred against the property." Lord Elmsworth's indignation deflated visibly, replaced by the calculating assessment that characterized his approach to family matters. "I see. It appears I may have been misinformed regarding certain aspects of the situation." "Indeed," Lady Margaret agreed quietly, though one wonders why Lady Fairfax's assertions were accepted without verification, particularly given their serious nature. A flush of embarrassment colored her brother's cheeks. "Lady Fairfax can be most persuasive in her presentations, and there was the matter of certain outstanding obligations." Understanding dawned. "She offered to address your gambling debts in exchange for cooperation," Thomas concluded, with evident disappointment. A transparent manipulation you somehow failed to recognize as such. Lord Elmsworth's expression hardened defensively. The estate faces unprecedented challenges. Agricultural yields have declined significantly, while expectations regarding social position remain unchanged. Difficult decisions become necessary under such circumstances. Lady Margaret regarded her brother with newfound clarity. His bullying demeanor masked desperation rather than mere cruelty, a realization that inspired compassion despite his willingness to sacrifice her reputation for financial advantage. "Richard," she said gently, "whatever our differences, we remain family. Had you approached me directly regarding estate difficulties, I would have gladly offered whatever assistance lay within my power." Something complicated flickered across his features, pride, shame, and reluctant gratitude in rapid succession. "The situation is perhaps not as dire as I may have suggested," he admitted grudgingly, "though certain obligations do require immediate attention." Thomas sighed with familiar exasperation. "I shall examine the estate books next week, Father, without intervention from Lady Fairfax or anyone else." As they concluded this unexpectedly productive conversation, Lady Margaret felt a subtle shift in family dynamics. Not complete reconciliation, certainly, but perhaps the beginning of more honest interaction. When they joined the gathering in the drawing room, the Duke approached immediately, concern evident in his expression. "Your meeting with Lord Elmsworth concluded satisfactorily, more productively than anticipated," she replied. "Though I suspect we have not heard the last from Lady Fairfax. Her resources diminish by the hour," he observed. "Lady Whitmore's exclusion represents merely the first of several social consequences she will experience in coming days." Before Lady Margaret could inquire further, Lady Whitmore summoned everyone to the dining room with characteristic authority. The evening meal proved a masterpiece of strategic social arrangement, conversations flowing with apparent spontaneity, yet clearly orchestrated for specific purpose. Lady Margaret found herself seated beside the Duke, with Lady Whitmore at the head of the table, maintaining benevolent supervision over her carefully arranged guests. The atmosphere combined formal elegance with surprising warmth, creating an environment where conversation flourished beyond mere social pleasantry. "You appear more settled this evening," the Duke observed as the first course concluded. "Your brother's unexpected arrival did not disturb your composure." Lady Margaret considered the question thoughtfully. "I find myself strangely liberated by recent confrontations. When one's worst fears materialize, yet fail to destroy one's dignity, their power diminishes considerably." Something appreciative warmed his austere gaze. "You possess remarkable resilience, Lady Margaret, a quality I have come to admire above most others." After dinner, the party retired to the music room, where Clara's accomplished performance on the pianoforte provided pleasant entertainment. Lady Margaret observed with quiet satisfaction the attentive manner in which Thomas turned pages for her niece, their interaction reflecting mutual respect beyond mere courtesy. As the evening progressed, Lady Whitmore orchestrated a subtle redistribution of guests that eventually left Lady Margaret and the Duke in relative privacy near the French doors leading to the terrace. The deliberate nature of this arrangement was unmistakable, yet executed with sufficient delicacy to preserve propriety. "Would you care for some air?" the Duke suggested, indicating the moonlit gardens beyond the glass. "The night is exceptionally mild for the season." Lady Margaret hesitated briefly before accepting his offered arm. The terrace extended into formal gardens, illuminated by strategic lanterns and the gentle glow of a spring moon. Their progress along the gravelled path maintained perfect propriety, while affording rare privacy for conversation. "I find myself compelled to address certain matters directly," the Duke began, after they had walked in companionable silence for several moments. "Recent events have unfolded with theatrical rapidity, leaving little opportunity for proper communication regarding my intentions." Lady Margaret felt her pulse quicken, despite her determination to maintain composure. "Your actions have spoken with remarkable clarity, Thornvale. Few would question your generosity in challenging circumstances." "Generosity suggests charity," he replied with unexpected intensity. "My actions reflect something altogether different." He guided her toward a stone bench positioned beneath a flowering magnolia, its pale blossoms luminous in the moonlight. Once seated, he removed his gloves with deliberate care, a gesture of significance not lost on Lady Margaret. "When I first observed you at that unfortunate ball," he continued, his voice carrying an unusual note of hesitation, "I was struck not merely by the injustice of Sir Alaric's behaviour, but by the extraordinary dignity with which you endured it. That initial impression has only deepened with subsequent interaction." Lady Margaret smoothed her skirts with careful hands. "You credit me with virtues born of necessity rather than choice, Thornvale. Extended invisibility teaches one to value rare moments of recognition. On the contrary," he countered with gentle certainty, "necessity reveals character rather than creating it. What emerged under duress was already present, merely awaiting proper recognition." He hesitated, then continued with careful precision. "You should know that my interest was neither impulsive nor motivated by mere chivalry. I had observed you for some time before that evening. Your composure during previous social slights, your kindness toward those similarly overlooked, your genuine appreciation for beauty amid prescribed tedium." This revelation startled Lady Margaret from her customary reserve. "You had noticed me before, but we had scarcely exchanged more than formal greetings in all the years of our acquaintance." A shadow of regret crossed his austere features. "A failing I have come to recognize with increasing clarity. Social convention creates artificial barriers that rational minds too often accept without question." He regarded her with that penetrating intensity that seemed to see beyond all social pretense. "I wish to speak plainly, without the ornamental circumlocution society demands. These past weeks have confirmed what I had begun to suspect through observation alone, that in you, Lady Margaret Elmsworth, reside qualities I have sought without success throughout 17 years of enforced sociability." Lady Margaret felt momentarily suspended between past resignation and unanticipated possibility. 17 years, she repeated softly. "An interval of some significance to us both, it seems." "Indeed." He reached for her gloved hand with careful deliberation. 17 years since my wife's passing left me with responsibilities I fulfilled through duty rather than inclination. 17 years during which you endured society's indifference with quiet dignity. Perhaps it required precisely such an interval for genuine recognition to emerge. The weight of this moment, its potential to transform her carefully managed existence, momentarily overwhelmed Lady Margaret's practiced composure. "Thornvale, I must speak with equal directness. While I am deeply honored by your attention, I cannot help but question whether recent dramatic events have created an impression of connection that might prove ephemeral once circumstances normalize." His response was not immediate but thoughtful, a quality she had come to value in their interactions. A reasonable concern, given the theatrical nature of recent developments, yet I would suggest that extraordinary circumstances reveal truth rather than distorting it. When social pretense is stripped away by necessity, authentic character and genuine connection become visible with unprecedented clarity. From the house came the gentle notes of Clara's continued playing, providing distant accompaniment to this most unexpected conversation. The Duke's expression softened in the moonlight as he regarded Lady Margaret with undisguised admiration. "I had intended a more formal approach," he admitted with rare vulnerability. "Lady Whitmore counselled traditional methods involving solicitors and settlements before personal declarations, yet I find myself unwilling to follow such prescribed patterns when the matters at hand transcend mere social arrangement." He released her hand and reached into his coat, retrieving a small velvet box, similar to the one that had contained the sapphire brooch. "This belonged to my grandmother, who specified it should pass to a woman of substance rather than merely advantageous connection." Opening the box revealed an exquisite ring of sapphires and diamonds, arranged in a pattern of elegant simplicity. Lady Margaret gazed at it with complex emotion, scarcely trusting herself to speak. "I offer this not as the Duke of Thornvale seeking suitable alliance," he said quietly, "but as a man who has discovered rather belatedly that dignity, intelligence, and authentic character outweigh all conventional considerations of age or circumstance. If you would consider accepting it, I would be honored beyond expression." The moment stretched between them, weighted with 17 years of resignation, suddenly transformed into unanticipated possibility. Lady Margaret regarded the ring, then the man offering it, with the careful assessment that had sustained her through countless social challenges. "I find myself at a disadvantage," she said finally, her voice steady despite the emotion beneath. "Having spent years perfecting the art of limited expectation, I discover myself ill-prepared for its opposite. Perhaps," he suggested with unexpected gentleness, "we might approach this new territory together, neither burdened by past limitations nor blinded by impractical idealism, a rational partnership founded on genuine appreciation rather than social convention." The practical nature of this proposal, its acknowledgement of reality while transcending mere arrangement, resonated with Lady Margaret's fundamental character. She removed her left glove with deliberate care, the gesture itself an answer before words could form. "I would be honored," she said simply, "to explore such territory with appropriate caution and authentic intention." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit that seemed somehow significant beyond practical consideration, Lady Margaret experienced a sensation entirely unfamiliar after 17 seasons of dignified resignation, the quiet certainty of having been truly seen rather than merely observed. Later, as they returned to the house where Lady Whitmore awaited with poorly disguised anticipation, Lady Margaret touched the blue ribbon still secured at her wrist, a talisman that had accompanied her through years of patient endurance, now transformed into a symbol of possibility rather than resignation. "Your thoughts seem distant," the Duke observed as they approached the lighted windows. "Not distant," she corrected gently, merely adjusting to altered perspective. "One sees landscapes quite differently when viewing them from unexpected elevation." His answering smile, a rare, full expression that transformed his austere features, suggested complete understanding of her meaning. Together they ascended the terrace steps, moving from moonlit privacy to the warm illumination of society's observation, yet fundamentally altered by the exchange that had occurred between. The morning following their moonlit conversation brought practical considerations to accompany emotional transformation. Lady Margaret awoke to find sunshine streaming through blue damask curtains, the unfamiliar weight of the sapphire ring a tangible reminder that recent events had not been mere fabrication of wishful imagination. A discreet knock heralded Lady Whitmore's arrival, an unprecedented honor that underscored the significance of current circumstances. The elderly countess settled herself in a brocade chair with characteristic decisiveness. "Thornvale informed me of developments," she announced without preamble. "A satisfactory conclusion to what threatened to become tediously prolonged courtship. I congratulate you both on demonstrating sensible efficiency." Lady Margaret arranged herself with careful dignity, despite the informality of receiving such a distinguished visitor in her morning wrapper. "Your role in facilitating these circumstances has not escaped my notice, Lady Whitmore. I find myself deeply grateful for your extraordinary intervention." Lady Whitmore dismissed this gratitude with aristocratic impatience. Intervention was hardly required, merely strategic acceleration of inevitable outcomes. Her shrewd gaze assessed Lady Margaret with characteristic directness. "You harbor reservations still. Understandable, given your extended experience of society's fickleness." This perception, so accurate it bordered on uncomfortable, momentarily silenced Lady Margaret's practiced social response. "I find myself adjusting to altered circumstances," she admitted finally. 17 seasons of carefully managed expectation cannot be immediately overcome, despite the most compelling evidence. "Precisely why we must address practical matters without delay," Lady Whitmore declared. "The announcement shall be made at this evening's assembly. Formal publication next week. Wedding to follow within the month. Extensive preparations being unnecessary at your respective ages and positions." The brisk efficiency of these pronouncements, reducing what traditionally involved months of negotiation and preparation to mere weeks, momentarily overwhelmed Lady Margaret's composure. "So quickly," she managed, her voice betraying uncharacteristic uncertainty. "Society will surely question such precipitation." Lady Whitmore's expression sharpened with amused impatience. "Society questions everything it fails to orchestrate directly. Their speculation is irrelevant to rational decisions made by individuals of substance." She rose with regal authority, smoothing her immaculate morning dress. "Thornvale awaits you in the library. I suggest you join him promptly to discuss particulars before my other guests descend for breakfast." Practical arrangements proceed most efficiently when managed directly by principal participants. With this imperial directive, she departed, leaving Lady Margaret to dress with careful attention despite the unusual circumstances. The blue silk gown she selected, modest yet undeniably flattering, provided familiar comfort amid accelerating developments. The Duke awaited in Thornfield's magnificent library, morning sunlight illuminating shelves of leather-bound volumes with golden warmth. His formal bow carried a new significance, as did the momentary softening of his austere features upon her entrance. "Lady Margaret," he greeted her with quiet intensity, "I trust you rested well." "As well as circumstances permitted," she replied, allowing a rare smile to accompany her words. "Lady Whitmore has already outlined an impressively efficient schedule for upcoming events." His answering smile, still restrained yet increasingly familiar, conveyed shared understanding. "Her ladyship believes in decisive action once proper decisions have been reached, a philosophy I find increasingly persuasive." He guided her to a comfortable seating arrangement near tall windows overlooking formal gardens. Once settled, he addressed practical matters with characteristic directness. "There are several considerations requiring immediate attention," he began. "First, regarding your current residence, I suggest maintaining it as your personal property rather than incorporating it into formal settlements. Financial independence, however modest, provides security that transcends mere emotional reassurance." The thoughtfulness of this provision, preserving her autonomy within the context of their unequal positions, touched Lady Margaret unexpectedly. "That is most considerate, Thornvale. Though I confess the property holds limited sentimental significance beyond representing hard-won independence. Nevertheless, it remains rightfully yours," he replied with quiet certainty. "As for more immediate concerns, Lady Whitmore proposes announcing our engagement at this evening's assembly, a gathering that will, I should mention, include several significant figures from London society." Lady Margaret's expression revealed momentary apprehension. "Including perhaps Lady Fairfax?" "Precisely." His tone carried that edge of steel she had come to recognize beneath aristocratic reserve. "Lady Whitmore believes, and I concur, that public acknowledgement in her presence represents the most efficient method of neutralizing lingering malice. The strategic nature of this approach, confronting potential opposition directly rather than allowing it to fester in absence, aligned with Lady Margaret's own practical nature. Yet the prospect of facing Lady Fairfax's inevitable reaction created understandable trepidation. "I confess some apprehension regarding this particular confrontation," she acknowledged with characteristic honesty, "though I recognize its practical necessity." The Duke regarded her with unexpected warmth. "Your courage in previous encounters leaves me with complete confidence in your capacity to manage this final engagement, though perhaps it offers some reassurance that you will not face it alone." This simple statement, the promise of partnership rather than mere protection, steadied Lady Margaret's resolve more effectively than elaborate declarations might have done. "Indeed," she replied with growing certainty, "shared challenges prove considerably less formidable than those faced in isolation." Their conversation continued with practical efficiency, addressing various arrangements with rational thoroughness that reflected their mutual preference for substance over sentimentality. When they eventually joined the household for breakfast, Lady Margaret felt an unfamiliar sensation of certainty amid transformation, as though solid ground had unexpectedly emerged beneath what had previously been shifting sand. Clara's reaction to the news, shared privately before the formal announcement, proved predictably enthusiastic. "I knew it!" she exclaimed, embracing her aunt with unrestrained delight. From that very first dance, the conclusion was inevitable to anyone with romantic sensibility. "Hardly inevitable," Lady Margaret corrected gently, "and perhaps less romantic than rational in its ultimate manifestation." Clara's expression reflected youthful skepticism. "Aunt Margaret, even rational decisions may contain romantic elements when they involve hearts as well as minds. The Duke may approach matters with practical directness, but his gaze, when it rests upon you, speaks volumes beyond mere arrangement." This observation, so characteristic of Clara's perceptive nature, beneath her excitable exterior, lingered in Lady Margaret's thoughts as preparations for the evening assembly progressed. Lady Whitmore had arranged an impressive gathering that blended country neighbours with strategic visitors from London, creating an audience of sufficient significance for the intended announcement. The sapphire ring adorned Lady Margaret's left hand, its presence both unfamiliar and increasingly comfortable as the day advanced. She had selected her finest evening gown, the blue silk from the Whitmore ball, complemented by the Duke's sapphire brooch and her grandmother's pearl combs. The reflection that greeted her in the dressing mirror seemed simultaneously familiar and transformed, the same features arranged with the same quiet dignity, yet somehow altered by recent developments. "You appear remarkably composed," Mrs. Pembroke observed, as she adjusted Lady Margaret's shawl with maternal care, "though perhaps experiencing internal turbulence beyond visible evidence." Lady Margaret smiled at this perceptive assessment. "A lifetime of practiced composure proves useful in unprecedented circumstances, though I confess some trepidation regarding Lady Fairfax's inevitable presence this evening. That woman," Mrs. Pembroke declared with uncharacteristic vehemence, "has exhausted her capacity for meaningful disruption. Her schemes have been systematically dismantled through exposure to daylight, the most effective disinfectant for malicious manipulation." As they descended to the grand drawing room where guests had begun to arrive, Lady Margaret felt the familiar weight of observation, though now tinged with different quality than the dismissive glances of previous years. The Duke awaited at the foot of the staircase, his formal evening attire emphasizing his imposing height and aristocratic bearing. The subtle warmth that transformed his features upon her approach remained visible only to those observing with genuine attention. "You look magnificent," he murmured as she placed her hand upon his offered arm. The simple compliment, delivered without embellishment yet carrying evident sincerity, affected Lady Margaret more profoundly than elaborate flattery might have done. Lady Whitmore orchestrated the assembly with characteristic precision, ensuring proper introductions and strategic conversational groupings. The Duke remained at Lady Margaret's side throughout initial formalities, his presence both protective and declarative, without requiring explicit statement. As predicted, Lady Isolde Fairfax arrived with calculated timing, neither conspicuously early nor fashionably late, but precisely when her entrance would command maximum attention without suggesting eagerness. Her gown of emerald silk complemented her golden hair and green eyes to dramatic effect, while her expression conveyed practiced social confidence despite recent setbacks. Her gaze located Lady Margaret and the Duke immediately, narrowing briefly before composing itself into perfect social pleasantry. With impressive determination, she navigated directly toward them, her smile fixed with artificial warmth. "Your Grace," she greeted the Duke with flawless courtesy. "Lady Margaret, how delightful to find you both enjoying rural pleasures. One hears such interesting reports of recent developments that curiosity becomes nearly overwhelming." The Duke's expression remained impeccably polite, while revealing nothing beyond formal acknowledgement. "Lady Fairfax, a pleasant surprise to find you among Lady Whitmore's guests." "Her ladyship was most insistent regarding my attendance," Lady Isolde replied with calculated lightness. "Something about ensuring proper witnesses for significant announcements. One naturally wonders what such mysteries might entail." Her gaze fixed upon Lady Margaret with barely disguised calculation, searching for confirmation of rumors that had evidently reached her despite careful management. When her attention settled on Lady Margaret's left hand, where the sapphire ring gleamed with undeniable significance, a momentary flash of genuine emotion cracked her perfect social mask. Before she could formulate response, however, Lady Whitmore approached with imperial purpose, effectively inserting herself into their conversation with aristocratic privilege. "Lady Fairfax," she greeted with deadly pleasantness, "how fortuitous that you accepted my rather last-minute invitation. Your presence completes the necessary audience for this evening's announcement." Lady Isolde's composure faltered visibly before she recovered with remarkable determination. "I would not have missed such an occasion for any consideration, Lady Whitmore, particularly given recent, interesting developments in certain quarters." "Indeed," Lady Whitmore's tone could have frozen champagne in its glass. "Developments that demonstrate the ultimate ineffectiveness of malicious intervention when confronted with authentic character and rational discernment." The direct nature of this rebuke, delivered with aristocratic authority that permitted no response, temporarily silenced even Lady Isolde's practiced social maneuvering. Before she could recover sufficiently to counter, Lady Whitmore signaled for attention, effectively commanding silence throughout the assembled company. "Distinguished friends," she announced with carrying authority, "it gives me particular pleasure to host this gathering on an occasion of significant happiness. The Duke of Thornvale has requested my permission to make an announcement of considerable importance." The assembled guests turned with undisguised interest as the Duke stepped forward, his bearing reflecting aristocratic authority tempered with unexpected warmth as he extended his hand toward Lady Margaret. With quiet dignity she joined him, their united presence creating an unmistakable picture before any words were spoken. "It is my profound honor," the Duke began, his voice carrying easily throughout the attentive gathering, "to announce my engagement to Lady Margaret Elmsworth. With Lady Whitmore's generous blessing, we shall be married within the month at Thornfield's Chapel." The announcement, delivered with characteristic directness rather than elaborate rhetoric, created an immediate sensation throughout the assembly. Expressions ranging from delighted approval to stunned disbelief circulated visibly among the guests, none more dramatically than Lady Isolde's barely concealed mortification. Lady Whitmore raised her glass with imperial authority. "To the Duke and his chosen bride, may their union exemplify the triumph of authentic character over mere convention." As glasses were raised throughout the assembly, Lady Margaret felt the culmination of 17 seasons compressed into a single crystalline moment of vindication. Not triumph over Lady Isolde's machinations, though that element undeniably existed, but rather the deeper satisfaction of having maintained dignity through extended invisibility, emerging ultimately into recognition based on genuine worth. rather than artificial calculation. The Duke's hand at her waist offered steady support as congratulations began flowing from all directions. Thomas approached with Clara, their expressions reflecting sincere delight rather than mere social obligation. "Aunt Margaret," Thomas said with genuine warmth, "I cannot express adequately how this development gladdens my heart. That genuine worth should receive proper recognition represents justice too rarely observed in our society." Clara, less restrained in her enthusiasm, embraced Lady Margaret with unabashed affection. "It is precisely like a novel's perfect conclusion, though perhaps merely the beginning of an even more interesting chapter." As the evening progressed through dinner and subsequent dancing, Lady Margaret observed with quiet fascination the transformation in her social reception. Where previous interactions had ranged from dismissal to grudging acknowledgement, now attention carried qualities of genuine interest and respect, changes attributable not merely to her elevated prospects, but to the public demonstration of her character throughout recent challenges. Lady Isolde maintained impressive composure throughout the evening, though her social performance carried a brittle quality beneath its perfect execution. When opportunity eventually placed her momentarily alone with Lady Margaret, near the refreshment table, she delivered her response with quiet intensity. "Felicitations on your remarkable achievement," she said, her voice carrying forced pleasantness over evident bitterness. 17 seasons of patience finally rewarded through unexpected intervention. One almost admires such determined persistence. Lady Margaret regarded her with the quiet dignity that had sustained her through countless social slights. "Not persistence toward calculated outcome, Lady Fairfax, but maintenance of principle regardless of result. A distinction perhaps difficult to comprehend when strategy replaces authentic character." Lady Isolde's perfect features hardened momentarily before reassembling into social pleasantry. "How fortunate that principle and advantage have aligned so conveniently in your particular case. One wonders whether principle alone would have proven equally sustaining without such dramatic intervention." "One need not wonder," Lady Margaret replied with simple certainty. 17 seasons provided ample demonstration of principle maintained without expectation of reward. An experiment few would voluntarily undertake, yet perhaps valuable for the evidence it provides. Something complicated flickered across Lady Isolde's expression, resentment mingled with reluctant recognition. "You have won this particular engagement through unexpected reinforcement. I acknowledge defeat with appropriate grace." "There was never competition," Lady Margaret corrected gently, "save that which existed in perception rather than reality. What appeared victory to external observation represents merely recognition of what always existed beneath artificial valuation." The Duke approached before Lady Isolde could formulate response, his timing suggesting deliberate intervention rather than coincidental arrival. His presence beside Lady Margaret carried protective intention without requiring explicit statement. "The first waltz begins shortly," he observed with perfect courtesy that nonetheless conveyed dismissal to Lady Isolde. "I believe you promised me this dance, Lady Margaret?" As they moved toward the center of the room where musicians had begun assembling, Lady Margaret felt an unfamiliar lightness replace the weight of 17 seasons' careful navigation. The Duke's hand at her waist provided support without constraint, his guidance suggesting partnership rather than mere direction. "You managed that final confrontation with remarkable grace," he observed, as they took position for the waltz. "Though I confess some concern regarding its potential for unpleasantness." Lady Margaret allowed herself a small smile. "Lady Isolde's capacity for malice diminishes considerably when divorced from secrecy and subterfuge. Direct engagement proves remarkably effective in neutralizing indirect manipulation, a strategic principle with broader application," he agreed, guiding her into the opening movements of the waltz with perfect synchronization, though one requiring considerable courage in its execution. As they moved through the familiar pattern, Lady Margaret became aware of the assembled company's attention, not the dismissive glances of previous years, but genuine observation of what many clearly considered an unexpected romance amid conventional calculation. The weight of such attention might once have created discomfort, yet now registered merely as acknowledgement of transformation long overdue. Later, as evening concluded and guests began departing, Lady Whitmore approached with evident satisfaction. "A most successful announcement," she declared with imperial approval. Lady Fairfax's composure nearly shattered at several junctures, a spectacle worth considerable inconvenience to observe. Lady Margaret concealed her amusement at this forthright admission. "Your orchestration of circumstances has proven remarkably effective, Lady Whitmore. "I find myself deeply grateful for your extraordinary intervention." The elderly countess dismissed this gratitude with characteristic impatience. Intervention merely accelerated inevitable resolution. Quality eventually distinguishes itself from mere appearance, given sufficient opportunity for demonstration. As the Duke's carriage returned them to Thornfield's main house through moonlit country lanes, comfortable silence settled between them, the quiet of mutual understanding rather than awkward absence. Lady Margaret gazed at passing shadows, her thoughts arranging themselves with characteristic orderliness despite unprecedented circumstances. "You seem contemplative," the Duke observed, his voice carrying that warmth she had come to recognize beneath aristocratic reserve. "I find myself adjusting perspective," she replied with honest simplicity. 17 seasons of careful resignation created particular habits of thought, not immediately overcome despite compelling evidence. His expression reflected genuine understanding rather than mere acknowledgement. Adjustment requires appropriate interval. Foundations established through extended experience do not shift instantaneously, however compelling the catalyst. This recognition, his appreciation of gradual transformation rather than immediate conversion, reinforced Lady Margaret's growing certainty regarding their compatibility beyond mere social arrangement. His respect for authentic process rather than prescribed performance aligned with her fundamental nature in ways that transcended conventional romantic narrative. As they reached Thornfield's imposing entrance, the Duke retained her hand a moment longer than necessary, his expression carrying unusual openness in the carriage's intimate shadows. "I anticipate our partnership with profound satisfaction," he said quietly. "Not merely for its social appropriateness, but for the authentic connection it represents beneath convention's arbitrary requirements." Later, as Lady Margaret prepared for sleep in the blue suite's elegant comfort, she touched the sapphire ring with quiet wonder. 17 seasons of patient dignity had culminated not in resignation's bitter acceptance, but in recognition's unexpected validation. The blue ribbon remained at her wrist, a talisman connecting past endurance with present possibility in silent testimony to continuity amid transformation. Tomorrow would bring practical considerations, social adjustments, and inevitable challenges as two independent lives reconfigured toward shared existence. Yet beneath such logistics lay something more fundamental than mere arrangement, the quiet certainty of having been truly seen rather than merely observed after 17 seasons of dignified invisibility. The morning of Lady Margaret's wedding dawned with unseasonable clarity, as though winter had momentarily surrendered to spring's inevitable advance. Sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows of Thornfield's ancient chapel, casting jewel-toned patterns across worn stone floors where generations of Whitmore ancestors had marked life's significant transitions. 1 month had passed since the Assembly's dramatic announcement, a period of methodical preparation rather than frantic arrangement. Lady Whitmore had orchestrated proceedings with characteristic efficiency, eliminating unnecessary elaboration while preserving essential dignity. The guest list remained deliberately selective, focusing on quality of connection rather than quantity of witnesses. In the private chamber where brides had prepared for centuries, Lady Margaret sat before an antique mirror, while Mrs. Pembroke secured her grandmother's pearl combs in her carefully arranged hair. Her wedding gown, commissioned with unprecedented haste, yet executed with remarkable precision, embodied elegant simplicity rather than ostentatious display. Silver-grey silk embroidered with subtle pattern of forget-me-nots complemented her natural coloring while suggesting symbolic significance beyond mere decoration. "You appear remarkably composed," Mrs. Pembroke observed, adjusting the delicate veil with maternal care, "though perhaps experiencing internal agitation beyond visible evidence." Lady Margaret smiled at this perceptive assessment. "A lifetime of practiced composure serves one well in unprecedented circumstances. Though I confess some disbelief still lingers, despite imminent reality." Clara entered with characteristic energy, her role as attendant bringing particular delight to her expressive nature. "Aunt Margaret, you look absolutely transcendent." The Duke will be rendered entirely speechless, though being a man of few words generally, perhaps that observation lacks meaningful distinction. This unexpected humor lightened the atmosphere, drawing genuine laughter from Lady Margaret. "Dear Clara, your presence brings joy to what might otherwise become excessively solemn occasion. Solemnity has its proper place," came Lady Whitmore's voice as she entered with imperial purpose, "particularly in ceremonies of significant import. However, authentic happiness need not sacrifice itself upon formality's rigid altar." She surveyed Lady Margaret, with uncharacteristic softness in her usually shrewd gaze. "You have navigated these extraordinary circumstances with remarkable dignity, a quality apparently recognized by at least one individual of sufficient discernment to value substance beyond superficial consideration." This understated approval from such formidable authority touched Lady Margaret unexpectedly. "Your intervention proved instrumental in facilitating that recognition, Lady Whitmore. I remain profoundly grateful for your extraordinary support." The elderly Countess dismissed this gratitude with characteristic impatience. "Intervention merely accelerated inevitable resolution. Quality eventually distinguishes itself, given sufficient opportunity for demonstration." She consulted a magnificent timepiece extracted from her gown's pocket. "The hour approaches. Final preparations, ladies." As Mrs. Pembroke and Clara attended to last details, Lady Whitmore remained briefly, her expression reflecting unusual introspection. "Marriage represents substantial transition regardless of circumstance," she observed, "particularly for those accustomed to independence through necessity rather than choice. Remember that partnership need not require surrender of individual substance, merely its reconfiguration within expanded context." This unexpected counsel, practical wisdom from one who had navigated both marriage and widowhood with formidable autonomy, registered deeply with Lady Margaret. "I shall endeavour to maintain that distinction throughout transition," she replied with genuine appreciation. "See that you do," Lady Whitmore responded with returning briskness. "Thornvale requires partnership rather than mere compliance, a distinction apparently recognized in his selection, if not explicitly articulated in conventional terms." With this characteristic blend of insight and directness, she departed to assume her position of honor within the chapel, leaving Lady Margaret to final moments of reflection before proceeding. In quiet solitude, she touched the blue ribbon secured beneath her glove. The talisman that had accompanied her through 17 seasons of patient endurance now incorporated into this most unexpected culmination. Thomas Elmsworth appeared at the appointed time, his role as escort reflecting familial reconciliation beyond mere ceremony. "Aunt Margaret," he greeted her with genuine warmth, "you appear absolutely radiant, though perhaps composed represents more accurate description, given your natural dignity." She accepted his offered arm with graceful appreciation. "Composition suggests deliberate arrangement, Thomas. I find myself experiencing authentic happiness beyond mere arrangement, a distinction worth noting in present circumstances." His answering smile reflected understanding beyond his years. "The distinction makes all difference between mere ceremony and genuine celebration." The Duke appears similarly affected, despite his characteristically reserved demeanor. As chapel doors opened, revealing assembled guests awaiting with expectant attention, Lady Margaret felt momentary hesitation, not regarding decision's wisdom, but its dramatic deviation from 17 years' carefully managed expectation. The chapel's interior glowed with morning sunlight and strategic candles, illuminating an intimate gathering of witnesses, selected for authentic connection rather than social obligation. The Duke awaited before the ancient altar, his formal attire emphasizing aristocratic bearing, while his expression revealed unexpected vulnerability as Lady Margaret appeared at the threshold. Their gazes connected across intervening space with silent communication that required no verbal elaboration, recognition of shared understanding beyond conventional romantic narrative. Her progress toward him maintained perfect dignity without sacrificing genuine emotion, each step representing deliberate choice rather than prescribed performance. When Thomas placed her hand in the Duke's with symbolic significance, the connection carried weight beyond ceremonial gesture, partnership founded on mutual recognition rather than mere arrangement. The ceremony itself embodied elegant simplicity rather than elaborate demonstration, ancient words acquiring renewed significance through authentic intention. When the Duke spoke his vows, his customary reserve softened with unexpected depth of feeling, transforming formal declaration into personal commitment beyond mere social contract. "I, Edward James William Thornvale," he stated with quiet intensity that carried throughout the chapel's perfect acoustics, "take thee, Margaret Ann Elmsworth, as my lawful wedded wife. To honor and cherish, to respect and defend, to value and uphold, from this day forward until death provides the only separation I would willingly endure." The slight deviation from traditional phrasing, his emphasis on respect alongside more conventional promises, reflected understanding of what Lady Margaret valued beyond romantic sentimentality. Her answering vows carried similar authenticity, her voice clear and steady, despite the emotion beneath careful composure. As the Duke placed the wedding band beside her engagement ring, his touch conveyed tenderness beneath formal precision. The physical connection, though modest by passionate standards, carried intimacy beyond elaborate demonstration, a private communication amid public declaration. When the clergyman pronounced them husband and wife, the assembled witnesses responded with genuine approval rather than mere social obligation. Clara's expression reflected undisguised delight, while Mrs. Pembroke discreetly dabbed moisture from eyes unused to such emotional display. Even Lady Whitmore's formidable countenance suggested satisfaction beyond strategic accomplishment. The Duke's kiss, though properly restrained given public context, carried promise beyond mere ceremonial requirement. As they turned to face assembled witnesses, Lady Margaret, now properly addressed as Duchess of Thornvale, experienced curious sensation of simultaneous transformation and continuity. Her fundamental character remained unchanged, yet circumstances had altered dramatically through recognition rather than reinvention. The wedding breakfast at Thornfield's magnificent dining room provided elegant celebration without excessive elaboration. Conversations flowed with genuine warmth rather than prescribed politeness, creating an atmosphere of authentic connection beyond mere social performance. Lady Whitmore presided with benevolent authority, ensuring proper attention to traditional elements while eliminating unnecessary tedium. When moment arrived for departure to Thornvale Estate, their primary residence moving forward, Lady Margaret found herself momentarily overwhelmed by transition's significance. 17 years of careful resignation, culminating in unexpected recognition, created emotional complexity beyond simple happiness. The Duke, with characteristic perception, noted this momentary vulnerability beneath composed exterior. As they prepared to enter the waiting carriage, he spoke quietly for her ears alone. "Transition permits adjustment at necessary pace," he assured her with gentle understanding. "Partnership accommodates individual process alongside shared experience." This acknowledgement, his recognition of her need for gradual integration rather than immediate transformation, confirmed Lady Margaret's growing certainty regarding their compatibility beyond conventional romantic narrative. As their carriage departed, amid traditional showering of flower petals and sincere good wishes, Lady Margaret gazed back at assembled witnesses, particularly Clara, whose expressive face reflected both delight and wistful recognition of impending separation. The young woman had blossomed remarkably during recent events, her natural vivacity complemented by newfound purpose beyond mere social achievement. "Clara shall visit frequently," the Duke observed, following Lady Margaret's gaze with characteristic perception. Her connection with Thomas suggests potential developments worthy of continued observation. Lady Margaret smiled at this diplomatic reference to what appeared increasingly evident attachment between her niece and nephew. "Development requiring appropriate interval for proper maturation," she agreed. "Youth benefits from measured progression rather than precipitous commitment." As Thornfield receded behind them and countryside opened toward their future residence, comfortable silence settled between them, the quiet of shared understanding rather than awkward absence. Lady Margaret gazed at passing landscape, its winter bareness showing first subtle indications of approaching spring. "Your thoughts appear contemplative," the Duke observed after several moments, his tone suggesting genuine interest rather than mere conversation. Lady Margaret considered her response with characteristic thoughtfulness. "I find myself reflecting on transition's curious nature," she replied with honest simplicity. "How 17 years of careful resignation culminated in unexpected recognition through circumstances no rational mind could have anticipated." His expression warmed with rare openness. Perhaps recognition required precisely such interval. Discernment often develops through extended observation rather than immediate impression. "A generous interpretation," she noted with gentle humor, though one suggesting remarkable patience in the observer. "Patience represents merely external manifestation," he countered with unexpected intensity. "Internal recognition occurred substantially earlier, lacking merely appropriate opportunity for demonstration." This revelation, that his awareness had preceded direct interaction by significant interval, created momentary silence, while Lady Margaret absorbed its implications. "When?" she asked finally, simple directness replacing social circumlocution. 3 seasons past," he admitted, with equal directness. "At Lady Harrington's musical evening, you responded to Sir Alaric's particularly cruel mockery with such composed dignity that it illuminated something essential about character's true nature." Observation continued from that point, though opportunity for direct engagement proved elusive until recent catalyzing events. The carriage traveled onward through winter landscape, showing subtle signs of approaching transformation, much like their evolving connection. Formal structure gradually yielding to more natural interaction as artificial barriers diminished through genuine familiarity. Thornvale Manor appeared eventually on distant hillside, its imposing architecture softened by afternoon sunlight. Ancient stone and modern additions created harmonious whole rather than discordant elements, tradition enhanced rather than constrained by thoughtful evolution. Home, the Duke stated simply, as the carriage approached through magnificent oak-lined drive. The single word carried significance beyond its brevity. Invitation and declaration combined in typical efficiency. For Lady Margaret Elmsworth, now Duchess of Thornvale, that simple word represented culmination of extraordinary transition. From forgotten spinster to recognized partner, through authentic connection rather than strategic calculation or romantic impulsiveness. As she placed her gloved hand in his upon reaching their destination, the blue ribbon remained at her wrist beneath formal attire, connecting past endurance with present possibility through silent testimony to continuity amid transformation. The Duke's answering pressure conveyed understanding beyond verbal elaboration. Their partnership had begun through unexpected recognition amid social theatre, yet would continue through deliberate choice beyond ceremonial performance. Authentic connection, transcending conventional narrative through mutual respect and genuine appreciation. Together they ascended steps toward their shared future, dignity undiminished, yet complemented by newfound certainty that recognition, once granted through genuine discernment, represented foundation more reliable than either resigned endurance or impulsive attachment. The great doors opened to receive them, symbolizing transition's completion and new beginnings' simultaneous commencement. Whatever challenges awaited beyond ceremonial celebration, they would face them as partners rather than isolated individuals, their separate strengths reconfigured through connection without surrendering essential character that had drawn them together through 17 seasons of patient observation and unexpected recognition. 5 years had transformed Thornvale Manor from imposing residence to genuine home through Lady Margaret's thoughtful influence. The Grand Library, once showcasing volumes rarely consulted, now hosted regular literary discussions where intellectual exchange flourished without regard to conventional social hierarchies. Formal gardens had acquired strategic, informal elements, creating harmonious balance between tradition and innovation that characterized their partnership beyond physical surroundings. On this particular spring afternoon, Lady Margaret, still addressed formally in public, though privately called simply Margaret in her husband's increasingly warm tones, sat beneath blooming magnolia tree that had been planted to commemorate their first anniversary. A delicate writing desk had been positioned to capture optimal light while providing view across estate's rolling landscape toward distant horizons. Her correspondence had expanded considerably since marriage, no longer private letters addressed only to herself, but extensive communication with various connections developed through meaningful interaction rather than mere social obligation. Today's particular letter addressed Clara, whose own circumstances had evolved dramatically through recent years. Clara's marriage to Thomas Elmsworth had occurred exactly as Lady Whitmore predicted, 2 years following their aunt's unexpected wedding, allowing appropriate interval for proper maturation. The young couple had established residence in London, where Thomas's legal practice flourished through genuine merit rather than family connection, while Clara's natural vivacity found productive channel through various charitable endeavours addressing society's overlooked members. Lady Margaret's letter contained typical familial updates, alongside more significant reflections gained through experience. Her quill moved across quality paper with practiced precision, recording thoughts arranged with characteristic orderliness despite their personal nature. Dearest Clara, spring at Thornvale brings particular beauty this season, perhaps enhanced through contrast with winter's unusual severity. Your uncle's agricultural innovations have proven remarkably successful, despite initial skepticism from neighboring estates. Transformation through thoughtful adaptation, rather than rigid adherence to tradition, continues producing results beyond conventional expectation. Lady Whitmore visits fortnight hence, her formidable energy undiminished despite advancing years. She maintains characteristic directness regarding all matters, particularly our continued failure to produce aristocratic offspring. I find her concern simultaneously amusing and touching, though your uncle responds with unusual discomfort to such direct references. Our contentment with existing circumstances appears incomprehensible to those measuring success through prescribed accomplishments rather than authentic satisfaction. Your news regarding Thomas's appointment to the Judicial Committee brings particular pleasure. Merit receiving appropriate recognition represents justice too rarely observed in our society. That recognition arrives through demonstrated character rather than strategic connection, proves especially satisfying given our family's particular history. Lord Elmsworth's improved circumstances, following your uncle's financial intervention, demonstrates forgiveness's practical benefits beyond mere moral satisfaction. Though reconciliation remains imperfect, civil interaction has replaced previous animosity, progress worth acknowledging despite its incomplete nature. Most significantly, dearest Clara, I find myself reflecting increasingly on transformation's curious nature. How circumstances, once representing painful limitation, evolved through unexpected recognition into life exceeding any reasonable expectation. Not through dramatic reinvention or strategic calculation, but through patient dignity eventually perceived by discerning observation. The lesson continues, providing guidance beyond specific circumstance. Dignity maintained through extended invisibility ultimately proved more valuable than any strategic performance might have accomplished. Authentic character, rather than artificial presentation, created foundation, supporting genuine connection beyond conventional romantic narrative. Your uncle, though maintaining public reserve, demonstrates increasing warmth within private interaction, evolution occurring through genuine familiarity rather than prescribed performance. Partnership deepens through accumulated understanding rather than dramatic declaration, creating connection more substantial than conventional depictions suggest possible. The blue ribbon remains at my wrist still, transformed from resignation's symbol to reminder that endurance often precedes recognition through intervals requiring patience beyond immediate gratification. The sapphires your uncle first provided as public declaration now represent private connection more significant than their considerable material value. I look forward with genuine anticipation to your summer visit. Thornvale's gardens reach peak beauty during July, while the library's recent acquisitions should provide ample material for those thoughtful discussions we both value beyond mere social exchange. With deepest affection, your Aunt Margaret. As she completed this correspondence, Lady Margaret became aware of approaching footsteps, her husband returning from morning consultations with estate managers. 5 years had altered him subtly, yet significantly, formal reserve gradually yielding to more natural expression within trusted company while maintaining appropriate dignity in public contexts. "Letters to Clara?" he inquired, settling beside her with comfortable familiarity that had developed through genuine connection rather than prescribed intimacy. "Indeed," she confirmed, setting aside her quill with careful precision. Reflecting on transformation's curious nature and recognition's unexpected pathways, his expression warmed with understanding beyond verbal elaboration, philosophical considerations amid familial communication. Characteristic integration of practical matters with deeper reflection. Lady Margaret smiled at this concise assessment, his appreciation for her fundamental nature remaining consistent despite circumstances' dramatic alteration. One discovers through experience that transformation often preserves essential character while modifying its external manifestation. He reached for her hand with deliberate tenderness, his thumb brushing across the blue ribbon still secured beneath her sleeve. The gesture carried intimate significance beyond its physical simplicity, acknowledgement of continuity amid transformation. "Lady Whitmore arrives fortnight hence," she informed him, her tone suggesting amused anticipation. "Undoubtedly," bringing renewed inquiry regarding aristocratic succession and appropriate intervals between significant announcements. His expression reflected unusual discomfort, despite 5 years' exposure to Lady Whitmore's direct approach toward all matters she considered within her legitimate domain of interest. "Perhaps we might schedule urgent business requiring temporary absence during particular portions of her visit?" Lady Margaret laughed with genuine delight at this uncharacteristic suggestion of strategic avoidance. "Cowardice, Your Grace, hardly consistent with your formidable reputation for confronting difficulties directly. Tactical retreat represents prudent strategy rather than cowardice," he countered, with dignified humor that had gradually emerged through their private interaction, particularly when confronting forces exceeding even ducal authority through sheer determination. Their conversation continued with comfortable familiarity as they walked together toward the manor house, its imposing architecture now representing shared domain rather than individual territory. Servants greeted them with genuine respect rather than mere obligation, household atmosphere reflecting partnership's influence beyond formal arrangement. That evening, as spring sunset transformed distant horizons with dramatic coloration, they sat together in private library space, where most significant conversations occurred beyond public observation. Firelight provided gentle illumination as they discussed various matters requiring joint consideration, estate management alongside broader social responsibilities attaching to their position. Thomas writes regarding legislation affecting legal representation for those lacking financial resources, the Duke noted, reviewing correspondence with characteristic thoroughness. His arguments demonstrate remarkable persuasion despite challenging existing conventions. Lady Margaret considered this information thoughtfully. Clara mentioned his increasing involvement with judicial reform. Their partnership appears remarkably complementary, her natural empathy balancing his logical approach toward justice's practical implementation. Similar balance often produces optimal outcomes, he observed, with quiet significance beyond specific reference, complementary perspectives creating more substantial progress than isolated viewpoints might accomplish independently. This observation, acknowledging their own partnership's similar dynamic without requiring explicit declaration, reflected communication's evolution beyond formal expression toward deeper understanding. 5 years had created connection, transcending conventional romantic narrative through accumulated appreciation for characters' fundamental qualities. Later, as evening concluded their daily activities, Lady Margaret completed her private ritual established through decades of consistent practice. The journal entry, no longer letters addressed to herself, but reflections recorded for potential future reference, maintained characteristic orderliness, while permitting greater emotional honesty than previous circumstances had encouraged. 5 years' experience continues demonstrating partnership's curious nature, how separate individuals maintain essential character while creating connection transcending mere arrangement. Dignity preserved through 17 seasons of patient endurance ultimately provided foundation for recognition beyond strategic calculation or impulsive attachment. The woman once dismissed as forgotten ornament now addresses substantial matters affecting numerous lives beyond personal circumstance. Not through dramatic reinvention, but through consistent character, finally receiving appropriate recognition from discerning observation. Happiness derives not from circumstances' dramatic transformation, but through authentic connections' steady development, beyond ceremonial declaration. Partnership evolves through accumulated understanding rather than prescribed performance, creating bond more substantial than conventional narrative suggests possible. The blue ribbon remains, connecting past endurance with present satisfaction through silent testimony to continuity amid transformation. As she secured this journal within the cabinet her husband had provided during their extraordinary courtship, Lady Margaret touched the sapphire ring that had transformed from declaration's symbol to partnership's representation. 5 years had altered external circumstances dramatically while preserving essential character that had drawn them together through unexpected recognition. Spring moonlight illuminated their shared chamber as she joined her husband in comfortable familiarity that had developed through genuine connection rather than prescribed intimacy. Their conversation continued with quiet understanding, discussing matters significant and ordinary with equal appreciation for exchanged perspective. Clara's latest letter suggests potential announcement forthcoming, Lady Margaret mentioned, as conversation reached natural conclusion. Though propriety prevents explicit reference until appropriate interval ensures certainty, his expression reflected genuine pleasure at this implied development regarding their niece's circumstances. Appropriate caution while anticipating potential joy, characteristic balance between practical consideration and emotional investment. This assessment, appreciating approach mirroring her own fundamental nature, demonstrated understanding developed through 5 years accumulated observation beyond initial recognition. Their connection had deepened through genuine familiarity rather than romantic idealization, creating partnership more substantial than conventional narrative suggested possible. As they prepared for sleep, Lady Margaret reflected on transformation's extraordinary nature, how 17 seasons of patient dignity had culminated in recognition beyond reasonable expectation, not through dramatic reinvention or strategic calculation, but through authentic character ultimately perceived by discerning observation after extended interval, requiring patience beyond immediate gratification. The blue ribbon remained at her wrist as testament to continuity amid transformation, connecting forgotten spinster with respected duchess through unbroken thread of essential character, preserved throughout extraordinary transition. Tomorrow would bring new responsibilities and opportunities, challenges and satisfactions beyond predictable anticipation. Yet whatever circumstances might develop, they would face them as genuine partners rather than isolated individuals, their separate strengths reconfigured through connection without surrendering dignity that had drawn them together through unexpected recognition after 17 seasons of patient endurance. In the quiet corners of our lives, where disappointment settles like dust on forgotten dreams, there lies a power greater than society's judgment, the power of unwavering dignity. Lady Margaret's journey whispers to us across time, not a fairy tale of magical transformation, but a testament to the soul that refuses to diminish despite years of invisibility. Perhaps the most profound wisdom from her story is this: true dignity is not a garment we wear for others' approval, but an inner light we maintain even when no one seems to be looking. For 17 seasons, Margaret tended this flame with patient hands, never knowing if recognition would ever come. The world often mistakes patience for resignation and quiet strength for acceptance of defeat. Yet in Margaret's steady heart beat a truth that our hurried age has forgotten, that character built through long endurance creates foundations that fleeting passion cannot match. Her story reminds us that sometimes life's most meaningful recognition arrives not as a thunderclap of sudden change, but as the dawn that follows our longest night. What appears to others as mere waiting may in fact be the most courageous form of becoming. The Duke saw in Margaret what society had trained itself not to see, that dignity maintained through extended invisibility reveals character more truthfully than any performance under admiration's spotlight. In our own lives, we too may experience seasons of being overlooked, undervalued, or misunderstood, the forgotten corners of existence where our worth seems questioned by the world's indifference. In these moments, Margaret's story offers not merely comfort but conviction, that maintaining our essential character when recognition seems most distant may be precisely what prepares us for connections of true significance when they finally arrive. The blue ribbon at her wrist reminds us that our past need not be discarded to embrace unexpected joy, that continuity amid transformation allows us to carry forward not our wounds, but the strength forged through enduring them with grace. Perhaps this is life's most hopeful mystery, that our seasons of patient endurance are never wasted, but rather silently preparing us for recognitions beyond our imagining, if only we have the courage to maintain our dignity when the world offers us every reason to surrender it. Did Lady Margaret's journey of patience and dignity touch something within your own heart? Perhaps you too have experienced seasons of waiting, of being overlooked, or of maintaining your worth when others failed to recognize it. Subscribe now to continue receiving stories that illuminate the quiet courage of enduring spirits and the unexpected recognitions that can transform our lives when we least expect them. Each narrative offers not merely entertainment, but mirrors in which we might glimpse our own strength reflected back to us. Share your thoughts in the comments below. When have you maintained dignity through invisibility? What unexpected recognitions have transformed your own journey? Your story matters, and in sharing it, you might become the voice that helps another maintain their own blue ribbon of hope through difficult seasons. Remember, the most profound connections often begin when we recognize in others the dignity they have maintained despite the world's indifference. Subscribe, comment, and join a community that values the quiet strength of enduring hearts.